Green Opal Tales presents Lost in the Wind by G.J. Copley. Chapter 1. More Than Mere Folklore. It was a bitterly cold December Sunday afternoon in 1964 when I, Tobias Auchenflower, no more than 12 years old, stumbled upon something beyond man's common reasoning and capability. The snow had begun to fall heavily, cloaking my hometown village of Herning in a thick white blanket as far as the eye could see. The crisp winter air sliced through my woolen scarf, and it was the perfect time for a game of hide-and-seek with my friends. I was always quick on my feet and proud of my ability to find the best hiding spots. But this time, I had wandered far from the edge of the village. My friends, calling out my name, had become faint voices as I ventured deeper into the dense forest, deeper than I was supposed to go. I hadn't meant to wander this far, but curiosity, as it often does, had pulled me along a narrow trail that seemed to lead deeper into the trees, the crunch of snow beneath my boots the only sound. The village was now a distant memory, the laughter of children lost in the wind. And then, in a small, eerie clearing, I came upon something unexpected. There, standing in the soft snow, was an enormous stone, its surface covered with intricate ancient markings. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, weathered by centuries of wind and rain. The runes carved into its surface told a story from a forgotten age. The stone towered above me, dark and foreboding, its presence almost unnatural in the quiet of the woods. For a moment I froze. My thoughts wandered to the old folklore tale my grandmother had told me many times when I was younger. "The stones, Tobias," she would say, her voice filled with mystery, "are not just ordinary stones. They hold the secrets of the past. On certain days of the year, when the wind is right, they become portals, connecting us to another world." The tale had always seemed like nothing more than a child's story. A legend passed down through generations, told on dark winter nights to send shivers down the spines of young children. I had never given it much thought. The grown-ups always laughed it off. Just a tale, they would say, nothing more. But standing before the stone, the whispers of that long-forgotten story suddenly seemed less like fiction and more like a warning. Something in the air had shifted, and I could feel it deep in my bones. The wind was all I could think about at that moment, and how it seemed to howl like a living creature around the colossal stone before me. Compelled by something I couldn't explain, I reached out and touched the cold surface of the stone. The moment my fingers made contact, a jolt of energy coursed through me and the world around me began to twist and warp. The trees blurred, the sky dimmed, and a sudden, powerful sensation of weightlessness overtook me. Back near the village, my friends, Magnus, Jacob, and Niels, called out in vain, their voices growing fainter with each passing minute. They had no idea how far I had wandered. Then, with no warning, the wind picked up, howling through the trees like something alive, and the clearing where I had last been seemed to grow darker. My friends stood frozen, feeling an unsettling chill creep through the air. There was no sign of me, only the stillness of the woods. I was no longer there. I was gone. The woods, now silent once more, held only the stone, its ancient markings glowing faintly in the fading light. It had been just a tale, or so we all had thought, yet here it was, happening before my eyes. A portal had opened. Chapter 2. The Kingdom of Byth-Hammath. Transported in a flash through a tunnel of grass with streaks of liquid gold, I found myself standing beneath a grand Norman arch. Stepping back to take stock of my surroundings, I saw nothing, no tree nor path, no hill nor valley, no people nor civilization, only a vast sky filled with warm golden light. The wooden door within the arch stood slightly ajar, as if tugging at my curiosity and inviting me in. As I approached, I heard a pleasantly relaxing hum, like the kind a gardener might make while contentedly working away on a sunny afternoon in a long-forgotten, secluded countryside garden. I hesitated slightly, my hand hovering over the smooth wooden door, when a deep, resonant voice spoke. "Welcome, Tobias Auchenflower. The kingdom of Byth-Hammath welcomes you here today." I stepped inside, expecting to see a man. Instead, resting upon a large stone in the heart of the garden, bathed in golden light, was a lion. His mane shimmered like woven sunlight, and his amber eyes held the depth of great wisdom and eternity. "You are wondering who speaks to you," he said, his voice both powerful and gentle. "It is I, Elion, keeper of the garden and guardian of this kingdom, the kingdom of Byth-Hammath." I stood in awe before the great beast. I had never heard of a lion that could talk, yet his presence felt as natural as the garden itself. "If you wish to go beyond the garden," he continued, "you must first be given a new name. Go and draw water," he said in his majestic voice. I turned my eyes towards the well and saw the wooden bucket that sat beside it, tied to a rope that disappeared into the depths below. Without hesitation, I took hold of the rope and pulled, feeling the weight of the water as the bucket slowly rose. As I set the bucket down, Elion spoke again. "Reach into the water and remove the stone that lies within." I did as he instructed, plunging my hand into the cold, clear water. My fingers closed around a smooth white stone resting at the bottom, and as I lifted it into the golden light, I saw something was inscribed upon it. Elion nodded. "The name written thereon is to be your name in this kingdom. Your earthly name, Tobias Auchenflower, must remain upon the earth. But within this kingdom, you shall be known by the name thereon." I paused slightly before reading it aloud. "Mythstad." Elion gazed at me with knowing eyes. "Now, Mythstad, step forward. There is much you have yet to know." Elion led me deeper into the garden, his silent yet authoritative presence guiding me toward the sound of flowing water. The air was rich with bird song and the scent of fresh fruit, filling my senses with a strange but familiar comfort. Before us, nestled within a gentle river, stood a single tree unlike any I had ever seen. Its trunk was thick and sturdy, rising from the riverbed with unwavering strength. Though it stood alone, its presence was commanding, as if it had existed since the beginning of time. Its roots plunged deep into the river's foundation, unshaken by the current that swirled around them. But what caught my eye most were the leaves, bright orange with dark blue veins pulsing ever so faintly, as if carrying a quiet, living fire. Elion stopped at the river's edge, gazing at the tree with quiet reverence. "This is the tree of Raznim," he said at last. "All who pass from the earth into this kingdom must drink from its leaves. Only then will they understand the 10 languages spoken within Byth-Hammath." But I had questions before I went any further. "Why did the stone transport me here? Why me?" I asked. He turned his great head toward me. "The stones were set in place by an ancient race that no longer resides on your earth. They possessed a knowledge now lost to time. A knowledge of specific days, times, locations, seasons, and alignments that, when in harmony with the right wind, act as portals to forgotten kingdoms. And it would seem that destiny has brought you here for a purpose, Mythstad." I was speechless as I stared at the tree in wonder. It all felt vaguely familiar, as if somewhere deep within my soul I had been here before, I had seen it before. Elion broke the silence. "Step into the river, Mythstad." Without hesitation, I stepped into the water. The river was cool against my skin, yet I felt no chill. It was as if the water recognized me, welcoming me rather than resisting. As I approached the tree, the sound of a great multitude of voices and languages filled my ears. I could not understand what they were saying, but I sensed that once I drank from its leaves, all that would change. I reached up and touched one of the glowing leaves. It was smooth and cool, like polished stone, yet alive beneath my fingertips. As if responding to my touch, a single drop of liquid swelled at the tip, clear, yet tinged with radiant blue light. Elion's voice carried above the murmuring voices. "Drink, and let Rasnim open your ears to the kingdom." I cupped my hands beneath the leaf, letting the drop gather before bringing it to my lips. The moment it touched my tongue, a wave of warmth surged through me, not burning, but illuminating, as though a hidden light had been kindled within my mind. The world around me shifted. The rush of the river was no longer just water. It was a voice, murmuring softly of its journey from the mountains beyond. The trees along the bank whispered to one another, their leaves singing in a speech I could now understand. The very air carried meaning, woven with the unseen laws of the land itself. I gasped, overwhelmed yet filled with wonder. Elion watched me with knowing eyes. "You now walk where nothing is silent. Listen well, Mythstad, and the voices of Byth-Hammath will guide you on your journey." I turned back to the tree, its orange leaves shimmering like embers in the soft golden light. A thought crossed my mind. How many others had come before me and stood where I now stood? As if reading my thoughts, Elion spoke. "You are right to wonder, Mythstad, for others have come before you from the earth, though they are far from the garden now." A mixture of reassurance and curiosity stirred within me. I was not alone. But who were they? Had they entered through the same stone? Had they entered another way? The voice of Elion, the lion, broke through my reverie, gently guiding my thoughts away from the questions that swirled in my mind. "You will learn of those that came before you, but that knowledge must come in time. The kingdom of Byth-Hammath holds its secrets close. The journey you have begun is one that will unfold at its own pace, revealing what is needed when it is needed." I nodded, trying to accept the weight of his words. There was something ancient and deep within this kingdom, something far older than the earth itself. My senses, heightened by the water from the tree of Rasnim, allowed me to feel its presence in every sound and motion around me. The wind through the branches of the trees, the soft murmuring of the river, the warmth of the golden light. All of it felt like a living thing, vibrant with life and purpose. Elion turned, motioning for me to follow. "You have been chosen for a reason, Mythstad. Though you do not yet fully understand it, there is much waiting for you." Elion's gaze deepened, his golden eyes searching mine. "You must go now, Mythstad. The tree of Rasnim has given you all you need for what lies beyond the garden." "Go where? And I'm just a boy," I said in a slight panic. "Age is nothing in this realm, Mythstad. Your name will carry greater weight than you know. The riders of Pen-Mec-Foon will be waiting for you." "The riders," I repeated, confusion flickering in my eyes. "Pen-Mec what?" Elion's eyes gleamed with ancient knowledge. "The Boar riders of Pen-Mec-Foon forest. They carry with them a prophecy," he said, his voice heavy with significance. "A traveler of your kind that will unite the lost tribes of Pen-Mec-Foon." A chill ran through me, though I knew not why. "A traveler?" I asked, my voice thick with unease. "A traveler to unite the tribes?" Elion's gaze softened, his mane shifting in the gentle breeze. "Yes, a traveler, just like you. Their tribes have been waiting for 600 years, and although they have made contact with others from those who passed before you, none could they find to suffice the prophecy and unite the tribes." I took a slow breath, the weight of his words settling over me. "What must I do to learn more of this prophecy?" Elion's amber eyes locked onto mine, his voice low but steady. "You must find the riders in the heart of the forest. They will not reveal the prophecy easily, for it is not a tale shared lightly. But if you prove yourself worthy, they will speak of it to you." Worthy, I thought. "I will find them," I said, the resolve in my voice growing. "I will hear the prophecy." Elion's mouth curled slightly, as though in approval. Very well, Mythstad. Let me show you the way. We walked together, the golden light of the garden dimming as we neared its boundary. Hours seemed to stretch by, but I did not count them. Finally, we arrived at the base of two immense willow trees, their branches twisted together to form a vast archway, clearly an exit from the garden and an entrance to the changing landscape beyond. The garden's glow faded as we crossed the threshold, the land beyond now muted, its colours earthy and grounded. Elyon stopped at the archway, his voice laced with both warning and regret. "This is as far as I can take you, Mythstad." I nodded, knowing that beyond this point, my journey was my own. In the realm of Byth-Hammath, I would seek the riders and learn the prophecy, the key to my future and the future of the tribes. The path ahead would be uncertain, but I had no choice but to walk it. Chapter 3. The Test of Lake Bannath and Pen-Mec-Foon Forest. Before us stretched a vast body of water, unsettling in its stillness. It was unlike any lake I had ever seen. Its dark, restless waters seemed more akin to an ocean, stretching endlessly beneath a heavy, brooding sky. A strange unease crept over me as I stared into its depths. "This is the Lake of Bannath," Elyon said, his voice low. "A remnant of the old world where giants once walked. This was the land of Bannath, the last of the giants. He lived for over 2,000 years, and spent those long years searching for another of his kind, a companion to share in his vast domain. But he found none, not one giant who matched his stature, not one voice to break the silence. He wandered the land, calling out for another, but his calls were never answered." Elyon's gaze darkened as he continued. In the end, he died alone in a world too small for him. His body fell into these waters, swallowed by the lake that now bears his name. I shivered as I gazed at the lake, its surface shifting as though something stirred beneath. "Beyond the lake lies the forest of Pen-Mec-Foon," Elyon went on, his eyes fixed on the dark waters. "The Boar riders dwell deep within its heart, a full day's journey beyond the lake's edge. If you wish to stand in their presence, you must prove yourself first, simply by reaching them." I swallowed. "But I can't swim across." Elyon's mouth curled slightly, though whether in amusement or solemnity, I could not tell. "No, you cannot," he said. "The lake stretches for miles upon miles, but there is another way." Then, without another word, he lifted his great head and let out a mighty roar, a deep resonant call that trembled through the very ground beneath me. The lake rippled violently in response, as if something immense stirred in its depths. A moment later, the surface broke. A colossal shape emerged, an enormous, glistening whale, unlike any creature I had ever seen before. Its skin shimmered like liquid silver beneath the dim sky, its eyes deep and knowing. It loomed before us, half submerged, waiting. Elyon turned to me. "This is your crossing." I hesitated. "My crossing? It will take you on its back," Elyon said, "but only if you tame it." I blinked. "Tame it? How?" Elyon's amber eyes gleamed. "With a story." I stared at him, unsure if he was jesting. "A story?" "The whale finds human stories as fascinating as you find this kingdom," Elyon explained. "Tell it the wrong story, and it will dive into the depths, leaving you to be swallowed by the lake." I swallowed hard. "And the right story?" "The right story will keep you above the surface. It will carry you to the other side." I turned to the whale, its great eye watching me, patient and expectant. But me, what could I possibly tell it? I stood before the whale, my mind racing. A story? Out of all the tales I'd ever heard, which one would be enough to hold the attention of such a vast and ancient creature? Then, like a spark in the dark, I remembered. Peter Pan. My father would always read it to me every Sunday night before bed. It was by far the story I knew the most, a boy who never grew up, a world beyond the ordinary, a place where one could stay forever. Wasn't that exactly what I sought? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The whale's great glistening eye watched me unblinking, and so I began. I told of Peter Pan and Wendy, of the lost boys and their island home. I spoke of Captain Hook and his ticking crocodile, of mermaids in their hidden lagoon, and fairies that flickered like stars. I described how Peter soared through the sky, laughing in the face of time itself. As I spoke, the whale let out a low, rumbling sound, not of warning, but of deep, swelling interest. It lifted its massive head slightly, drifting closer to the shore as if to hear more. Encouraged, I pressed on. I told of how Peter battled Hook upon the Jolly Roger, how he tricked the pirate again and again with his cleverness and daring. I spoke of the moment Wendy and her brothers returned home, leaving Peter behind, unchanged, forever young, forever free. The whale made a sound like the creaking of ice upon a vast sea. Then, to my astonishment, it dipped lower, pressing its enormous back against the shore. An invitation. I turned back to Elian, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. He stood tall beneath the willow gateway, his golden mane shimmering in the dim light. "If I succeed," I said, "if I reach the riders, and how will I return?" Elian's amber eyes softened. "When the time comes, return to the edge of the lake. Stand where the trees no longer grow and the water greets the land." I nodded. "And then?" "Begin again," Elian said. "Retell the story, and it will remember you, rising from the depths to carry you back across." I stepped forward, my heart hammering, and climbed onto its broad, wet hide. The moment I was seated, the whale surged forward, cutting through the water like a silver blade. The wind rushed past me, carrying away my breath. The lake stretched endlessly in every direction, its depths black and unknowable, but I was no longer afraid. I was flying. For what felt like hours, the whale carried me, listening to every word. I spun the tale of Neverland as best as I could, weaving its magic into the air, and the whale, enraptured, bore me safely across the endless lake. At last, the far shore appeared, dark and dense with trees. The whale slowed, then gently lowered itself so I could climb off. I hesitated. "Will I see you again?" I asked. The whale let out a deep, musical hum, an answer I could not quite understand, yet felt within my bones. Then, without another sound, it slipped beneath the surface, vanishing into the depths once more. I turned to face the towering forest before me. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and old wood. Shadows stretched between the trees, their trunks gnarled and ancient. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward. The path was rough, winding through dense undergrowth. The trees loomed overhead, their branches tangled like grasping fingers. But soon, something caught my eye. Huts. Old, abandoned huts, their walls built of whale bones and packed mud. Some leaned at odd angles, their roofs half collapsed. Others stood intact but lifeless, their doorways gaping like empty mouths. I paused, glancing around. The place was eerily silent. Who had lived here, and why had they left? A cold breeze stirred the trees, whispering through the empty huts. I pressed on deep into the forest, its dense canopy swallowing what little daylight remained. I walked on until the whalebone huts disappeared behind me, replaced by towering trees laden with dark purple berries the size of footballs. At first, the eerie trees appeared sporadically, but the deeper I ventured, the more they multiplied. A strange gas-like odor clung to the air, thick and nauseating. At first it only made me drowsy, but soon a deep ache settled into my bones, as if I were aging rapidly with every breath. The heavy canopy trapped the fumes, suffocating me in their grip. Desperate for air, I cried out to the trees themselves. "Let me breathe!" My voice barely carried through the choking fog. I staggered forward, then fell to my knees, my limbs too weak to hold me. When even crawling felt impossible, I pressed my ear to the damp earth, my breath shallow. Then I heard it, a faint rumbling beneath the forest floor, like the gallop of a distant horse, but less rhythmic, more primal. I forced myself to turn toward the sound, then saw it. A massive, muscular boar thundered through the trees, a lone rider astride its back, fearless and swift. The fumes dragged me into a haze, my vision flickering in and out. Then strong hands lifted me, pulling me onto the beast's back. Rescue or capture, I couldn't tell. My body had reached its limit. Darkness took me. Chapter 4. The Boar Riders of Pen-Mec-Foon Forest. I awoke many hours later to the smell of campfire smoke and the unmistakable murmur of voices gathered around me. The sky was now a dark red, bringing a chill in the air as the sun sank lower. The earth beneath my body felt soberly cold. I missed the warmth of the garden, the fact that there was no rising or setting sun there, just an eternal golden light. And I missed the safety I felt next to Elion and his authoritative presence. The people surrounding me were tribal and sturdy, with thick, matted brown hair and wild beards. A few of the men sported spiked hair held up by some sort of gel. Their faces and arms bore swirling blue ink tattoos that glowed faintly in the dim light, giving them an almost spectral appearance. They wore heavy coverings of thick boar fur draped over their shoulders and backs, fastened at the front with leather cords or bone clasps. These were not jackets, but mantles, allowing their arms and chests to remain bare, revealing the intricate swirling tattoos that adorned their skin. Beneath their fur mantles, they wore rugged trousers, reinforced with patches of thick hide and stitched with sinew. Their boots were made from hardened leather, built for long rides, with curved boar tusks affixed to the outer sides, polished, gleaming white, a mark of their people. The warriors moved with an air of confidence, their posture proud yet relaxed. As they sat around the fires, I watched them tear into their meals, large wooden bowls filled with a steaming, thick stew. Within the broth floated massive mushrooms, each as big as a man's fist, their dark surfaces glistening with oil. Strange, tangled herbs bobbed alongside them, releasing an earthy, almost peppery aroma. Some of the men dipped thin, crisped rounds of bread-like cake into the stew, soaking up the rich flavors before devouring each bite. The night air carried the scent of smoke, not only from the cooking fires, but also from a large bone pipe that several of the warriors passed among themselves. It was carved from some great beast's femur, covered in intricate spiral patterns. Each time one of them took a slow draw, the bowl of the pipe glowed faintly, releasing thick, curling black smoke. The scent was bitter, almost metallic, clinging to the back of my throat as I breathed it in. They did not speak as they smoked, only watching the flames, their expressions distant as if caught between worlds. Though they were fierce, there was a deep order to their ways. Every movement, every glance exchanged between them spoke of an unspoken law, a bond that held them together, stronger than blood alone. This was not just a tribe. This was a people bound by tradition, by their beasts, by the very land itself. They spoke in hushed, curious tones before turning their attention to me. At first I didn't understand their words. Surely they spoke in some ancient tongue. But then, as my senses slowly returned, the memory of the tree of Raznim stirred within me, and I began to understand. "He is just a boy. What brings him here?" one man said. "I found him under the trees of Tannath-Kook," replied another. The man holding my head up looked into my eyes and spoke again, his voice deep yet oddly gentle. "Young boy, what brings you here?" I swallowed, my throat dry. Though their words were foreign, their meaning was clear, clearer than it should have been. The knowledge of their tongue was not learned but remembered, as if the tree of Raznim still ran deep within me, feeding me wisdom beyond my own. The man repeated his question. Young boy, what brings you here? I parted my lips to answer. The words slipped free as if they had always been mine. I came by accident, through the stone, from the garden. Elion told me. The camp fell silent. The boar riders exchanged glances, tattoos shifting in the firelight. A few muttered under their breath. The first man studied me closely. You speak Kimdroith. I hesitated. Kimdroith. That was their tongue. And they were the Mârcogi Bârchi, the boar riders of Pen-Mec-Foon. The knowledge was simply there, rising from some deep well within me. A broad rider, his braids tied with bone, folded his arms. Have you come to spy out the land? And who is this Elion you speak of? No, I started, but before I could explain, a woman among them stepped forward. Her dark eyes scanned me with quiet intensity. Without hesitation, her rough, work-worn hands reached into my pockets, searching. Her fingers brushed against something smooth and she froze. Carefully she withdrew it. It was the stone that I had been given from the well and from the garden that bore my new name. When she turned it over and saw the inscription, her breath caught. Her hands trembled as she clutched the stone and grabbed her husband's arm. Look, she whispered urgently. It bears the name. Her husband, a broad man with a thick beard braided with bone, frowned as he took the stone from her. His expression shifted from confusion to something deeper, reverence, or perhaps fear. The murmuring around us died away as the others noticed their reaction. The leader of the group stepped forward and took the stone, holding it up to the firelight. His jaw tightened as he read the name aloud. Mythstad. A heavy silence settled over the gathered warriors. Their eyes flickered between me and the small stone, as if I had become something altogether different in that moment. Without a word, the leader reached into his garments and withdrew a long, curved trumpet horn made of whalebone. He raised it to his lips and blew 3 mighty blasts that echoed through the forest like the roar of some ancient beast. The camp stilled. Conversations ceased. The crackling of the fire seemed deafened by the sound as every member of the tribe snapped to attention. From the surrounding huts and shadowed paths, the mighty men of the camp emerged, their towering figures illuminated by the glow of the flames. Their tattoos shimmered in the firelight, their braided beards swaying as they moved with urgency. Before I could ask what was happening, strong hands grabbed me. The world spun as I was hoisted up onto the back of one of their massive boars. Its bristling hide was coarse beneath me, its tusks gleaming like ivory blades. A second rider swung up behind me, gripping the reins tightly. I barely had time to gasp before the beast lurched forward, surging through the camp at a breakneck pace. The wind whipped past my face as the other warriors mounted their own boars, charging after us in a flurry of hooves and dust. Wait! I tried to shout over the thundering of the beasts, but my voice was swallowed by the night. No one answered. No one explained. I was being taken somewhere, whether for honor or doom, I had no idea. Chapter 5. Arrodogos, Chief of the Mârcogi Bârchi. The ride through the dense and murky forest of Pen-Mec-Foon was a blur of motion, the trees streaking past in a speeding haze as the great boar beneath us surged forward with relentless pursuit. I sat at the front of the beast's broad back, my small hands gripping the coarse bristles of its thick hide as best I could, while the warrior seated behind me kept one steady arm across my middle to keep me from being thrown free. The creature's powerful shoulders rolled beneath us as it thundered through the undergrowth, its breath steaming in the cold forest air. The air itself was thick with the mingled scents of damp earth, pine, and the distant ghost of smoke, a sign of fires unseen, smouldering in the unknown reaches beyond the trees. My heart thundered in my chest, each beat in unison with the pounding of hooves against the forest floor. At length, the riders slowed, their charge yielding to a measured pace as we emerged into a great clearing. Before us loomed a vast hall, its towering roof steeply pitched and adorned with carvings of wild beasts entwined in eternal battle. The entrance stood flanked by two massive pillars, each wrapped in the bleached tusks of countless boars, their curving forms twisting skyward in a silent, frozen ascent. The warriors dismounted with the ease of men long accustomed to the saddle. I, however, was granted no such grace, lifted down from the boar's back by the same warrior who had ridden behind me and set firmly upon unsteady legs. Strong hands gripped my arms, guiding me forward, my breath shallow as I passed through the threshold of the hall. Within, the space was immense, the ceiling held aloft by beams thick as tree trunks, their rough-hewn surfaces inscribed with symbols of a time long past, washed in blood-red dye. The flickering torches that lined the walls illuminated figures gathered in silent council, their eyes following my approach with keen, assessing gazes. At the far end of the hall, upon a raised dais of polished stone, sat a man of great authority, though he wore no crown nor carried any weapon. Draped in robes of deep green, their fabric dark as the shadowed woods, he was a figure of quiet command, his posture straight, his hands resting lightly upon the arms of his seat. His countenance was pale, his features drawn with the sharp precision of a man whose days were spent in study rather than battle. His eyes, however, dark, fathomless, bore the weight of a mind ever turning, ever watching, ever weighing the truths of the world against the laws of old. This was Arrodogos, chief of the Mârcogi Bârchi, though in their tongue his name meant simply chief, for none could challenge his wisdom and none sought to replace him. He did not rise, nor did he speak. He merely observed, his gaze impassive, considering. Then, with the smallest of gestures, he turned his head slightly and murmured a few quiet words to the figure at his right. Colchumvock stepped forward. A striking figure of towering height, his form was lean with the tempered strength of a warrior who knew both the weight of steel and the discipline of restraint. Unlike the others, who bore the blue, dark-inked sigils of their people, his tattoos burned red against his skin, swirling in intricate designs from the base of his throat down the length of his muscled arms. It was said his name meant Fire Sun in the old tongue of the Kimdroith, and true to it, his hair rose in a jagged crest of yellow and orange, bright as the dawn upon the mountain peaks. He carried a great spear of sharpened stone, its point bound in a shaft of polished wood adorned with the feathers of a mountain eagle, silent testimony to the reach of his skill. He approached with measured steps, his piercing gaze fixed upon me, the weight of his scrutiny near unbearable. Across his broad chest hung a leather strap, from which was slung a heavy tome, its darkened cover worn with age, its spine stitched with golden thread that gleamed in the firelight. With a careful, deliberate motion, he withdrew it, opening its thick pages with the reverence of a man unearthing a long-buried truth. The parchment within was yellowed, inscribed with symbols I could not recognize, jagged like the markings of claws, yet flowing like the currents of a river. For a moment he merely studied it. Then, at last, he spoke, his voice measured, solemn. "The child who comes from the beyond," he read, his words a whisper through the stillness of the hall. "He shall bear a name written in the book of Raznim. He shall unite the 4 tribes of Pen-Mec-Foon." A ripple passed through the gathered assembly, murmurs, hushed and urgent, flaring like sparks upon kindling. Yet Arrodogos did not move, his expression unreadable. He merely waited, his gaze locked upon the book in Colchumvock's hands. I swallowed, my throat dry. "What does this mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Colchumvock did not answer at once. Instead, he turned to the final pages of the tome, where lists of names were inscribed in tight, unwavering script. With slow precision, He traced his finger down the length of them, pausing near the bottom. Then, turning the book toward me, he allowed me to see. There, among the many, written in a book older than the oldest kingdoms I had ever known, was mine. Mythstad. A shudder ran through me, the weight of the moment settling in my chest like stone. How could this be? The whispers of the gathered warriors grew louder, some voices lifted in astonishment, others tinged with doubt. At last, Colcomvoc closed the book and turned toward me. "The book of Rasnim does not lie," he said. "Your coming was foretold, long before any of us were born." I shook my head, my thoughts a whirlwind. "But I am no king. I hold no great power. I don't even know why I am here." Colcomvoc regarded me for a long moment, then spoke, his voice quiet, firm. "The prophecy does not speak of a man who seeks power. It speaks of one who carries the will of the land. Perhaps you are not yet what the book foretells, but you have been named, and that cannot be ignored." Arrodogos stirred at last, leaning forward slightly, his fingers interlacing as he regarded me in the dim firelight. He exchanged a few low words with Colcomvoc, words I could not hear. Then, with a single nod, he dismissed him. Colcomvoc turned back to me, his gaze unreadable. "You must stay with us. My men will assist you in all that you need. We will train you up, and you will become one of us at length." I took a slow breath, steadying myself. I had stepped into a world I did not understand, bound by a fate I had never sought. But one thing was certain. Whatever was to come, I would not be given a choice. Chapter 6. Life in Pen-Mec-Foon. That night I slept within the great hall of the Mârcogi Bârchi. The hall was vast and entirely hewn from stone. Great marble pillars rose toward a vaulted ceiling lost in shadow, and the floor beneath my bedding was smooth grey marble, worn faintly by centuries of footsteps. The fires had burned low, leaving only the steady glow of red embers scattered across the immense stone hearths that lined the length of the chamber. By day, the hall rang with the voices and movement of the tribe, but now it lay in a deep and reverent silence. My resting place had been prepared in the far corner beneath one of the towering marble pillars. The mattress was thin, yet strangely comfortable, fashioned from the feathers of mountain eagles and layered with thick boarskin furs that held the warmth of the fires long after the flames had faded. Two of Arrodogos' strongest warriors stood watch nearby. They spoke little and barely moved, their immense figures silhouetted against the dim torchlight. Each held a long spear tipped with black stone, their faces stern and unreadable as they guarded the sleeping hall. At first I struggled to sleep. Everything around me was unfamiliar. The distant breathing of the boars in their stone stables outside the hall, the soft crackle of dying fires, and the whisper of wind slipping through the narrow openings high within the stone walls. Yet exhaustion eventually overcame me. The journey through the forest, the meeting with the chief, and the weight of the prophecy had drained every ounce of strength from my body. At last, I slept. For 4 days and 4 nights, the news of my arrival spread throughout the forest of Pen-Mec-Foon. Word travelled swiftly among the scattered settlements of the Mârcogi Bârchi. Riders carried the message along hidden paths through the towering pines and moss-covered valleys. The child from beyond had come, the child named in the book of Rasnim. And so, they came. Men and women of the tribe arrived each day to see me with their own eyes. Some travelled for many hours through the forest, simply to stand within the great hall for a moment and look upon me. I did not understand why. To them, however, I was not merely a boy. I was something foretold. Some bowed their heads slightly when they passed me. Others offered small gifts, polished stones, carved tokens from ancient boar tusks, or rare berries gathered deep within the forest. None stayed long. They would enter the hall quietly, speak briefly with Arrodogos, then cast a curious or reverent glance toward me before departing once more into the forest. It was as if they were confirming something, as if they were searching my face for proof that the ancient prophecy had truly awakened. During those days, Colcomvoc rarely left my side. Where Arrodogos was calm and watchful like a mountain, Colcomvoc was constant movement, always observing, always teaching. He became my guide to the ways of the land. Each morning, when the first grey light crept through the forest canopy, he would wake me. "Come," he would say simply, and we would leave the hall together. Not far from the hall flowed a great winding river called Arathel. It moved slowly and peacefully through the forest, its waters dark and glass-like beneath the towering trees. Along its banks grew hundreds upon hundreds of enormous oily mushrooms the size of a man's fist. These were called takblethal. They grew in thick clusters along the damp soil of the river banks, their dark glossy skins reflecting the morning light. Within the river itself lived the tribe's most prized food, the giant purple carp-like fish known as takmathel. Some were no larger than the carp one might see in rivers on earth. Others grew to immense proportions, nearly the size of a small tiger shark. One such fish alone could feed an entire family of the Mârcogi Bârchi for a full week. These fish, together with the takblethal mushrooms, formed the daily diet of the tribe. The Mârcogi Bârchi never consumed the flesh of their boars. To them, the boars were sacred creatures held in deep reverence within the teachings of the Book of Raznim. They were companions, mounts, and beasts of honor, never food. When a boar died naturally, the tribe used every part of its body with respect. The tusks were carved into daggers or shaped into fishing lures. The bones became spearheads and tools. The thick hides were fashioned into garments and blankets, but the meat was never eaten. Such a thing would have been unthinkable to them. Colcomvoc showed me how the tribe fished the waters of Arathel. Their fishing rods were simple things, strong willow branches cut and shaped by hand. A thin strand of braided boar fur served as the line. At the end of the line hung a lure carved from polished boar tusk. Each lure was shaped like a small fish with a sharp hook hidden at the tail. Every tribesman crafted his lure differently. Though the shape remained roughly the same, the decorations varied. Some were painted with red, blue, or green tribal markings. Others were carved with intricate symbols. Before casting, they coated the tusk lure with oil pressed from the takblethal mushrooms. The scent drifted through the water like a signal, and the takmathel could not resist it. One morning, Colcomvoc demonstrated the method. First, he gathered a basket full of takblethal mushrooms from the river bank, their oily skins glistening in the sunlight. Then he cast his line. The lure flashed brightly beneath the water. It did not take long. The surface of the river suddenly erupted as something immense struck the line. Colcomvoc braced his feet calmly upon the stones of the river bank as the great fish fought against him. The purple shape thrashed violently beneath the water, sending waves across the river's surface. After a long struggle, he hauled the creature from the depths. It was enormous, nearly the size of a small shark, a takmathel. I stared at it in awe. Colcomvoc simply smiled. Soon he allowed me to try. At first, my casts were clumsy and uneven, but the calm atmosphere of the river drew me deeper into its quiet rhythm. The river banks were peaceful in a way I had never known before. The slow-moving water, the towering trees, and the silent mushrooms lining the shore, it all carried a strange and ancient tranquility. Day by day I grew better. Soon I could cast the line cleanly across the water. Sometimes Colcomvoc would simply sit upon a stone beside the riverbank and watch as I fished, saying very little, but I could see the quiet approval in his eyes. Of all the fishing lures among the tribe, Colcomvoc's was the most famous. His tusk lure gleamed like polished silver in the sunlight. This was because he had coated it with pure silver taken from the distant mountains of Arathel, a journey said to take 5 years to travel from Pen-Mec-Foon. No other lure shone like his, and none caught fish as often. Yet Colcomvoc's lessons were not only about fish and rivers. Beyond the river road stretched another path leading from the great hall, a long road of worn stone, and along this road stood the ancient standing stones of Pen-Mec-Foon. Each towered higher than 2 men. Their surfaces were covered with carvings worn smooth by time. They stood silent and unmoving, yet Colcomvoc treated them with the reverence one might show a living being. "The land listens," he told me one morning as we stood before the first stone. "The wind speaks to it, the seasons shape it, and sometimes it answers." On the 4th night the moon rose full above the forest. Colcomvoc led me once more along the stone road. The forest was completely silent. Even the wind had stopped. "This night is different," he said quietly. We stopped before the tallest of the standing stones. Colcomvoc stepped back. "Touch it." I placed my hand upon the stone. At first there was nothing. Then a faint tremor stirred beneath my palm. Colcomvoc leaned forward. "Do you feel it?" "Yes," I whispered. Then suddenly the carvings began to glow. A deep blue light spread across the entire stone. The forest around us filled with an eerie radiance. Colcomvoc stared in disbelief. "The Book of Raznim," he murmured. He looked from the glowing stone to me. The doubt that had lingered in his gaze vanished. "You truly are the child it spoke of." The light slowly faded. The forest returned to darkness. Colcomvoc placed a hand upon my shoulder. "The tribes must never know how strong your connection to the stones truly is." "Why?" I asked. His voice became grave. "Because if word spreads beyond Pen-Mec-Foon, others will come." His eyes hardened. "And not all of them will wish to protect you." He looked once more toward the silent stones. "From this moment forward, Mythstad, you must be protected. At all costs." Chapter 7. Darkness Crept Unaware. Life in Pen-Mec-Foon settled into a quiet rhythm. Each morning the forest would wake before I did. The distant calls of birds, the slow stirring of the boars in their stone enclosures, and the low crackle of the fires being brought back to life within the great marble hall. Colcomvoc would wake me without ceremony. "Come." And we would go. It was on one such morning that he decided I would make my own fishing rod. We stood by the edge of the forest where the willow trees grew, their long branches swaying gently in the breeze. Colcomvoc placed a knife in my hand. "Not too thick," he said, "and not too thin." I studied the branches carefully before cutting one free. It bent slightly but held firm. He nodded. "Good." From there we gathered strands of boar hair, long and coarse. He showed me how to bind them together, twisting them into a strong line. Then came the most important part, the lure. He handed me a small boar tusk, already shaped but not yet finished. "Carve it," he said. I worked slowly, shaping it into the likeness of a small fish as I had seen him do. My hands were clumsy at first, but he did not rush me. When it was done, he brought forth a paste made from crushed yellow flowers. "Tak-blithal oil will carry the scent," he said, "but color draws the eye." I painted the lure carefully, the yellow dye soaking into the polished tusk. When it dried, it held a quiet brightness in the light. Colcomvoc held it up, inspecting it. Then, for the first time since I had known him, he gave a small, approving smile. We gathered tak-blithal mushrooms along the banks of the Arathel. Their dark, oily skins caught the light faintly along the riverbank. We fished for tak-mathel beneath the slow-moving surface of the river, sometimes bringing in great purple shapes that fought with tremendous strength before yielding to the shore. In the afternoons, I learned the markings and sounds of Kimdroith, the tongue of the Mârcogi Bârchi. Colcomvoc was patient in his teaching, though never soft. Again, he would say, and I would repeat the words until my tongue shaped them correctly. Sometimes I would sit with Arrodogos within the great hall. He spoke little, yet when he did, his words carried weight. "You learn quickly," he said to me once. I did not know how to answer that, so I simply nodded. As the days passed, something within me began to change. The fear I had carried since my arrival slowly loosened its grip. The forest no longer felt strange. The hall no longer felt foreign. Pen-Mec-Foon began to feel like something I belonged to. It was on the night of the full moon that everything changed. Sleep would not come. I lay upon my bedding beneath the marble pillars, listening to the silence of the hall. The fires had burned low, and the warriors stood watch as always. But something within me stirred, a quiet pull, restless. Slowly I rose. I took my rod, and without waking anyone, I left. The forest was pale beneath the moonlight. The path to the Arathel felt different at night, longer, quieter. The shadows stretched between the trees, and the air carried a stillness that seemed to listen. When I reached the river, it lay calm and dark before me. I cast my line. The lure vanished beneath the surface, and I waited. Time passed, nothing came. At last I sighed and began to draw the line back in. "One last cast," I whispered. I cast again. The lure sank, the line stilled. Then a tug, soft, gentle, another pull, strange, not like a Takmathel. Then suddenly, the line jerked violently. Before I could react, a tremendous force yanked the rod from my hands and pulled me forward, into the river. The cold struck like a blow. The world vanished into darkness and rushing water. Something wrapped around my arm, then another around my legs. I struggled, kicking, twisting, but it was stronger, far stronger. I saw it then, a shape in the black water, massive, moving, a great squid-like creature, its body the size of a small boat, its skin black as the void. Its eyes, white, streaked with red, glowed faintly in the darkness. Its tentacles coiled around me. I tore one arm free, but another seized my neck, tightening, crushing. The world began to fade. Then, a flash, a spear cut through the water, stone-tipped, familiar, Colcomvoc. The spear drove into the creature's head. Its grip loosened. Strong arms seized me. I was dragged upward, gasping for air. Colcomvoc pulled me onto the bank, hauling both me and the creature out of the river. I collapsed, coughing and gasping, my vision blurred. Beside me lay the creature, still, dead. Its eyes were bloodshot, its body covered in jagged glowing spikes, its tentacles slick with slime. Colcomvoc said nothing. He lifted me, not gently. He carried me back through the forest at speed. I could feel the anger in him. By the time we reached the hall, my strength had gone. Darkness took me. When I awoke, it was morning. Voices filled the air. Outside the hall, the entire tribe had gathered. At the center lay the creature, displayed for all to see. Arrodogos stepped forward. Crandannath, a murmur passed through the tribe. Fear, recognition. "It should not be here," Colcomvoc said. "These creatures come from beyond the mountains of Arathel," said Arrodogos. "Yet one has found its way to our river." "It did not come by chance," Colcomvoc said. A chill ran through me. Had something heard of me? "The hall," Arrodogos said, "to the council." And as we walked back toward the great marble hall, I could not shake the feeling that something far beyond Pen-Mec-Foon had begun to watch. Chapter 8. Whispers of the Evil One. The days that followed did not pass as they once had. Time in Pen-Mec-Foon no longer felt slow or uncertain. It moved with purpose, with rhythm, shaping not only the land, but me. I grew, not only in body, I felt that clearly in the strength of my limbs and the steadiness of my breath, but in ways far deeper. I began to understand the land. The Arathel was no longer simply a river to me. I could read its surface, sense its movement, and know where the Takmathel gathered beneath the dark water. My casts became precise, my hands steady. I no longer fought the line, I worked with it. There came a day when Kolkumvok did not rise from his place on the river bank. He simply watched. And I caught 3 Takmathel in a single morning, one small, one strong, and one great enough to feed many. When I turned to him, he gave no praise, but he nodded, and that was enough. I learned the ways of the forest. The Tak-Blithel no longer hid from my sight. I knew where they grew thickest, where the soil held the right dampness, where the shade allowed them to thrive. Their dark skins caught the light faintly along the river banks, and I gathered them quickly and without waste. I learned the sounds of the forest, the movement of wind through branches, the distant call of beasts. And the silence that meant something was wrong, and I learned Kimdroith, not as a stranger learning words, but as one remembering something long forgotten. I could speak with the Mârcogi Bârchi. I could read their markings carved into stone and bone. I could write my thoughts in their tongue. It no longer felt borrowed. It felt like it had always been there. Kolkumvok watched all of this. There were moments, quiet ones, when he would rest his hand upon my shoulder, not as a guide correcting a student, but as one acknowledging something earned. He spoke more to me now, not only of the land, but of the past, of tribes that once walked together, of battles long before my time, and sometimes of nothing at all. We would sit beside the river in silence, and that silence was enough. I did not know when it changed, but somewhere in those passing days, he became more than my teacher, and I was no longer simply the boy who had arrived from beyond. But with that growth came something else, something darker. The dreams began slowly. At first they were fragments, shadows moving where I could not see clearly, shapes forming and dissolving before I could understand them, a presence, distant, yet watching. I would wake in the night, my breath uneven, my heart racing, and still I could not say why. Then the dreams deepened. I saw a land unlike Pen-Mec-Foon, barren, broken, the sky above it unmoving, as though the wind itself had abandoned it. The ground cracked and lifeless, as if something had drained the breath from the earth, and in the distance, something stood. I never saw it clearly, but I felt it, watching, waiting, and always. A name, Tannath-Kook. I did not speak of it at first. Even in waking, the name felt wrong. But then, the day came when I did. Kolkumvok and I were walking along the banks of the Arathel, gathering Tak-Blithel beneath the shade of the trees. The air was calm. The river moved slowly, and without thinking, I spoke. "Who is Tannath-Kook?" Kolkumvok stopped. The mushrooms slipped from his hand. Slowly, he turned to me, his eyes locked onto mine. "How do you know that name?" There was no calm in his voice, only shock and something close to fear. I have seen it," I said, "in dreams. Do not speak that name here." His voice dropped low, controlled, urgent. He stepped closer. "The land listens," he said. "The river carries the voice of men. Words do not remain where they are spoken." His gaze shifted briefly to the water. "That name is not for open ground." Before I could respond, he seized my arm. "Come." We moved quickly, faster than ever before, through the forest, back toward the hall. When we entered, Kolkumvok did not release me. He led me straight to the center. Arrodogos was already there. Kolkumvok spoke. "He knows the name." Silence fell. heavy. Arrodogos looked at me. "Tell me." And so I did. I spoke of the dreams, the land I had seen, the presence that watched from afar, and the name that would not leave me. Tannath-Kook. This time, the name was spoken within stone, contained. When I had finished, the hall remained silent. Then Arrodogos spoke. "He knows." Colcomvoc nodded. "There is no doubt." A chill ran through me. "You mean, he knows I am here?" "Yes." Colcomvoc stepped forward. The Crandaneth was no accident, it was sent. The memory struck me at once. The black water, the crushing grip, the eyes. Arrodogos rose. "The time of quiet has ended." His gaze moved across the hall, then returned to me. "You cannot remain here." The words struck deeper than I expected. "Where will we go?" I asked. "To Greth-An." "The caves of Greth-An," he continued, "once home to the Greth-Ani, one of the tribes who stood beside us before the division." Colcomvoc spoke quietly. "They are hidden." "And safer than this place," said Arrodogos. The decision was made. Preparations began at once. The hall filled with quiet urgency. Supplies were gathered, weapons checked, paths considered. The Mârcogi Bârchi did not panic, but they understood. Something had changed. Colcomvoc stood beside me. "You will come with me." There was no question in it. I nodded. And as I looked upon the great hall once more, I understood something clearly. Pen-Mec-Foon had shaped me, but it would not be where my journey ended. Chapter 9. The Taming of Norbênek. The day before we were to leave Pen-Mec-Foon, Colcomvoc came to me at first light and spoke only a single word. "Come." There was something deliberate in the way he said it, not urgent, not harsh, but measured, as though what lay ahead had already been decided long before I woke. We did not go toward the river that morning. Instead, we walked deeper into the forest, beyond the familiar paths I had come to know. The air grew cooler beneath the thick canopy, and the light thinned as the trees closed in around us. The ground told its own story, marked with tracks of passing creatures, some light and scattered, others deep and heavy, pressed firmly into the earth. Colcomvoc slowed and knelt, brushing his hand across one of the deeper impressions. "Mâr-Tuthan," he said quietly. I stepped closer and studied the track. It was large, the edges firm and defined, the weight of it unmistakable. "The great boars," he continued, "the ones the men ride." He shifted slightly and pointed to a second set of tracks nearby. These were smaller, lighter, their pattern quicker and closer together. "You will not take a Mâr-Tuthan," he said, rising to his feet, his eyes meeting mine, steady and certain. "Not yet." There was a pause before he spoke again. "You will take a Mâr-Tuthi, the smaller breed of wild boar from these woods." I felt something tighten in my chest, though I could not say whether it was fear or anticipation. Still, I nodded. We continued in silence after that. Colcomvoc said nothing more, and I understood that he would not. This was not a lesson he would speak through, it was one I would have to find myself. The forest seemed to grow quieter as we followed the tracks deeper between the trees. The sounds of Pen-Mec-Foon faded behind us until only the wind and the distant stir of unseen life remained. Every step forward carried a weight to it, as though the land itself was watching. Then, ahead, something moved. Colcomvoc raised his hand at once, and I stopped. Through the brush, partially hidden by shadow and leaf, I saw it. A Mâr-Tuthi, smaller than the great boars, but still powerful in its build. Its body was compact and dense with muscle, its hide dark and coarse. It moved with careful intent, rooting through the earth, pausing now and then to listen, wild, unclaimed. Colcomvoc leaned closer, his voice barely more than breath. "Do not chase it," he said. "Bring it to you." I understood at once. Slowly I reached into the satchel at my side and withdrew a tak-blithel mushroom. I placed it upon the ground, then another, each one set a little closer to where I stood. The scent carried through the still air. The Mârcogi lifted its head. It sniffed once, then again, its body remaining still as its eyes searched. I did not move. Another step. It came closer, cautious but curious. I placed another mushroom, closer still. My heartbeat steadied, not from calm, but from focus. Every movement felt deliberate, every breath measured. The boar stepped forward again, its gaze fixed on me, its breath slow and controlled. Then Colcumvoc's voice came, low and sharp. Now! I moved without hesitation. Closing the distance in a single motion, I leapt onto its back. The reaction was instant. The Mârcogi surged forward with explosive force, twisting violently beneath me as its strength broke free in a sudden burst. I gripped tightly, my hands finding purchase in its coarse hide as it bucked and turned, trying to throw me clear. It ran, through brush and low branches, over roots and uneven ground, its body coiling and snapping beneath me with wild, unrestrained power. I did not fight it. I held on, adjusting with each movement, shifting as it shifted, learning its rhythm even as it tried to break me. The forest blurred around us. Branches tore at my arms, and the ground shifted beneath its hooves, but still I did not let go. Its strength was immense, but not endless. I began to feel the change before I saw it. The sharpness of its movements dulled slightly. Its turns became slower, its bursts of speed shorter. Its breath grew heavier with each passing moment. Still, I remained. Until at last, the Mârcogi faltered. Its stride broke, its pace slowed, and finally it came to a stop. Its sides rose and fell heavily, its head lowering just slightly, not in defeat, but in something quieter. Acceptance. I stayed upon its back for a moment longer before stepping down. The boar did not run. It remained where it was, breathing, watching, alive, but no longer resisting. Colcumvoc approached, then his gaze moving between us. There was something different in his expression, something that had not been there before. "You did not break it," he said. I shook my head. "You stayed." He nodded once. "That is how it is done." He looked to the boar. "Now you will name it." I placed my hand against its side and felt the strength that still remained within it. The resistance, the struggle that had not been taken from it, only understood. The word came to me without thought. "Norbênek," I said quietly, the word for struggle in Kimdroith. Colcumvoc gave a single nod. "It is yours." That night, beneath the full moon, we left Pen-Mec-Foon. There were no great farewells, no long speeches to mark our departure. The Mârcogi Bârchi stood in silence, their watchful eyes following us as we passed. They understood what this journey meant, even if no words were spoken. Colcumvoc walked at the front, his spear at his side, and his fishing rod secured across his back. At his waist hung a map of the kingdom of Byth-Hammath, worn but carefully kept. Beside him walked his great boar, a Mârcogi, massive and unyielding, and behind him I walked with Norbênek, smaller but no less strong. Across my back rested my own rod, and at my side I carried the book of hymns from the Mârcogi Bârchi, ancient words drawn from the book of Raznim, taken for strength in the days ahead. At the edge of the forest, Arrodogos stood waiting. "The path before you will not be easy," he said. His gaze rested on me, steady and knowing. "But it is yours." I nodded. Colcumvoc turned. "Come." And together we stepped beyond the edge of Pen-Mec-Foon and out of the forest. The trees thinned behind us, their shadows falling away as the land opened into wide stretches of open ground and low marshland. The air felt different there, less sheltered and more exposed, as though the land itself offered no protection. Before us lay the long and mysterious path to Greth-An, and a new journey had just begun. Chapter 10 of Root and Stone. The land beyond Pen-Mec-Foon did not welcome us in the same way the forest had. Where the great trees once stood in quiet guardianship, there was now only open ground stretching wide beneath the sky. The earth felt bare and watchful, broken in places by shallow pools of dark water and long veins of marshland that reflected the pale light of the morning. Even the wind moved differently here, unhindered, restless, carrying with it a chill that seemed to come from far beyond the horizon. Colcomb-Voc walked ahead, as he always did. His stride was steady and unwavering, his spear resting across his shoulder as though it weighed nothing at all. His boar moved beneath him with heavy certainty, each step pressing deeply into the softened ground. Behind him, I rode Norbênek. The smaller boar moved more lightly, though no less sure of its footing. I could feel its strength beneath me, no longer wild in the way it had been, but not broken either. It moved with its own will, and I had learned not to fight it, but to move with it. For a time we traveled in silence. There were no forest sounds here, no birds calling from the canopy, no distant movement through the undergrowth, only the wind and the slow rhythm of hooves against damp earth. I found my hand drifting often to the satchel at my side. The book of hymns rested within it. I had not opened it since we left. Something about this place made me hesitate, yet the longer we walked, the stronger the pull became. At last, as the sun climbed higher and the land stretched endlessly before us, I drew the book from its place and opened it. The pages were worn, the markings written in Kimdroith. I could read them now without struggle. The words no longer felt foreign to me, they felt known, ancient, as though they had been waiting. My eyes moved across the page until they came to rest upon a passage I did not remember reading before. From the quiet of root and stone, where the hidden winds are sown, shall walk the small from worlds apart, with fire unseen within his heart. By his side, the lesser steed, not of might, but forged in need, through trial bound and struggle named, a path of fate shall be reclaimed. Before him walks the guardian tall, bearer of flame that does not fall, through shadowed land and open sky, where silent watchers never die. The river knows, the stones have seen, what lies beyond, what lies between, and when the distant dark draws near, the chosen path shall lead through fear, not crowned by gold, nor forged by throne, but marked by trials faced alone. The small shall rise where others bend, and shape the path that does not end. My voice faltered as the final words left me. The wind carried the last echoes of it across the open land. For a long moment there was only silence. Then Colcomb-Voc slowed. He turned his head slightly, not fully, but enough. "Read it again," he said. There was no hesitation in his voice, only certainty. I swallowed and began again, this time stronger. As I spoke, something shifted, not in the land, but in the meaning of the words themselves. The small one from beyond, the lesser steed, the guardian who walks ahead. I stopped. The realization came slowly at first, then all at once. "This is us," I said quietly. Colcomb-Voc said nothing, but he did not deny it. "It is not a story," he said at last. "It is a path." The wind moved across the marshland in a long breath. I looked down at the page again. The words no longer felt distant. They felt present, alive. "Then it has already begun," I said. Colcomb-Voc nodded once. "It began the moment you arrived." We continued forward after that, but something had changed. The land no longer felt empty. It felt aware, as though each step we took was being marked, watched. The marshland deepened as we moved on, the ground growing softer beneath the weight of the boars. Pools of still water reflected the sky in broken fragments, and the horizon ahead seemed to blur. Far in the distance, barely visible through the haze, something rose from the earth, dark shapes, jagged and unnatural. Colcomvox slowed. "The caves of Greth-An," he said. "They did not look like a place of refuge. They looked like something waiting." After some time, Colcomvox guided his boar toward a wide stretch of marsh, where the water gathered in a shallow basin. "We rest here," he said. The boars stepped forward and drank. Norbênek lowered his head beside the dark water, steady and calm. I dismounted and stood beside him. For a moment, there was peace. Then the air changed. A sharp sound cut through the stillness, the beating of wings. I looked up. 3 shapes moved across the sky. As they drew closer, their form became clear. Bat-like wings, crow-like bodies, large as condors. Wrong. "Montori, stay back," said Colcomvox. They did not circle. They came straight for us. They dropped from the sky. Claws seized me, one on each side. The ground fell away beneath me. I was lifted into the air, their grip crushing, their wings beating in unison. I struggled, but their strength was too great. The sky rushed around me. Then I saw him below. Colcomvox moved without hesitation. In one motion he cast his spear. It cut through the air with unstoppable force. The strike was instant. The spear tore through both creatures at once. Their bodies jerked, their wings faltered. Their grip broke and I fell back to the earth. The ground rose fast. Impact drove the breath from my lungs. Beside me, the 2 Montori crashed into the marsh, lifeless, the spear still piercing them both. The third had already turned. It climbed higher into the sky, fleeing toward the distant mountains, toward something unseen. Colcomvox reached me quickly, pulling me upright. "You are not taken," he said. I shook my head. He turned toward the sky. I looked at the fallen creatures. "They were sent," I said. Colcomvox's voice lowered. "No, they were watching." The wind moved again across the marsh, colder now. I looked toward the distant mountains where the last Montori had vanished, and in that moment I understood with terrible clarity. We were no longer unseen. Chapter 11. The Caves of Greth-An. By the time we reached the outer edge of Greth-An, the light had begun to fade. The land rose gradually beneath us, the marsh giving way to firmer ground, though the air remained heavy with moisture. The wind carried a different scent here, stone, cold and ancient, as though the earth itself had been opened long ago and never truly sealed again. The caves revealed themselves slowly. At first, they appeared as little more than shadows along the face of a great ridge of dark rock. But as we drew nearer, their scale became unmistakable, vast openings carved into the mountainside, their edges jagged and uneven, as though they had not been shaped by tools, but by something far older, something that had forced its way through. Norbênek slowed beneath me, and I felt the hesitation before I fully understood it. Even Colcomvox's great boar lowered its head slightly as it approached the nearest opening. "They know this place," Colcomvox said quietly. I looked toward him. "The Montori nest here." A chill passed through me as I turned my gaze back to the dark mouths of the caves. "They breed within these chambers," he continued, dismounting with slow, deliberate care. "They sleep as bats do, hanging in the darkness, waiting for the night." "And if we wake them?" I asked. Colcomvox met my eyes. "Then we do not leave." There was no fear in his voice, only certainty. We dismounted in silence. The boars were guided carefully, their steps measured and quiet as we crossed the threshold into the cave. Even they seemed to understand what was required of them. Inside, the air changed at once. It was cooler, stiller, and far heavier than the open land behind us. The sounds of the world beyond the cave vanished almost immediately, swallowed by the stone. Each step we took echoed faintly beneath our feet, though even that sound seemed quickly absorbed into the vastness around us. As my eyes adjusted to the dimness, I began to see them, shapes above us, clusters, at first indistinct, then slowly forming into something far more unsettling, the Montori. They hung from the ceiling in great numbers, their bodies folded inward, their wings wrapped tightly around them as they slept. Some shifted slightly as we passed beneath, their claws tightening against the rock, but none stirred fully. Up close, their size was far greater than I had realized. Each one was large enough to carry a man, their forms lean and dark, their wings thin and vast. Even in stillness, there was something unnatural about them, something that did not belong to the natural order of the forest. Colcomvoc's voice came as little more than a breath. They feed on what lives within these caves, rats, small creatures, and sometimes Mârtuti. My grip tightened slightly on Norbênek's bridle, though I kept my movements slow. We continued deeper, each step placed with care, each breath measured. The weight of the creatures above us pressed down like a presence, as though the entire ceiling might come alive at the slightest mistake. After some time, the cave narrowed and turned. As we followed the bend, the air shifted again, subtly at first, then unmistakably. It felt lighter. The oppressive stillness eased. We stepped into a smaller passage, and at once it became clear. There were no Montori here. The ceiling was empty. The silence, though still deep, no longer felt watchful. Colcomvoc stopped and glanced upward before nodding slightly. This is not part of their nesting ground. I let out a slow breath, only then realizing how tightly I had been holding it. Here we could speak, though still quietly. We moved further along the passage until it opened into a narrow chamber, sheltered by the surrounding stone. "This will hold," Colcomvoc said, "for the night." A small fire was lit, carefully shielded so that its light would not reach the outer passages. The warmth spread slowly, pushing back the chill that had settled into my body. Norbênek lay close beside me, its steady breathing a quiet reassurance in the stillness. Colcomvoc remained awake longer, his gaze fixed toward the passage, listening in a way I was only beginning to understand. As the fire burned low and the night deepened, something shifted along the walls. At first I thought it was only the movement of flame, but then I saw them, carvings, faint at first, then clearer as the firelight reached them, markings etched into the stone, hidden until the light revealed them. I leaned closer, studying the shapes. "I cannot read this," I said quietly. Colcomvoc rose and stepped beside me. For a long moment, he said nothing, his eyes moving slowly across the markings. Then his expression changed. "These are not like the others," he said. "They are newer." He traced one of the lines lightly. "This was written after the fall." A chill moved through me. "What does it say?" Colcomvoc was silent for a time, as though choosing his words carefully. "They did not leave these caves willingly," he said at last. "They were driven out." "How?" His gaze remained fixed on the stone. "Not by blade," he said, "but by something worse." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had lowered, a whisper. The words seemed to settle into the chamber itself, sent across the wind, from beyond the mountains. I felt something stir uneasily within me. "It entered their minds," he continued, slowly. "They began to change." His voice grew quieter still. "They turned on one another. Their thoughts were no longer their own. Their reason lost." "They went mad," I said. Colcomvoc nodded. "All but one." I looked at him. "One." He traced the final marking. "This was written by a man who did not fall." Why not? Colcomvoc's gaze shifted toward me, steady and certain. Because he held the hymns of Rasnim in his mind, he said, and in his heart. He did not let them go. The firelight flickered across the carvings. The hymns, I said slowly. They protect against it? Yes. The answer came without hesitation. Silence followed, heavy with understanding. My hand moved instinctively to the satchel at my side, to the book I carried. The same hymns, the same words, now bound to me in ways I had not yet fully understood. Colcomvoc stepped back from the wall. We leave at first light, he said, through the far side of the mountain. I nodded. But as I lay down beside Norbênek, the warmth of the fire doing little to quiet my thoughts, one truth settled heavily within me. The danger we faced was not only of claw and fang, but of something unseen, something that did not strike the body, but the mind. And as sleep slowly took me, I could not help but wonder if the whispers had ever truly left this place. Chapter 12. The Mountains of Arathel. Morning came slowly within the caves of Greth-An. There was no sunrise to mark it, no golden light breaking across the horizon as there had been in Pen-Mec-Foon. Instead, the darkness softened by degrees, the faint grey of a distant opening creeping into the narrow chamber where we had rested. Colcomvoc was already awake. He stood near the mouth of the passage ahead, his posture still, listening, not for what was present, but for what might be. We leave now, he said quietly. I rose at once, the memory of the carving still lingering in my thoughts. Norbênek stirred beside me and stood, steady and ready. There was no need for fire, no need for words. The path before us was narrow, cut clean through the stone, as though it had been shaped for passage long ago. It stretched forward in a single direction, deeper and then upward. We did not turn back. We moved forward. The air shifted as we walked, growing lighter with each step. The oppressive weight that had lingered in the deeper chambers of Greth-An began to fade, replaced by something clearer, more open. After some time, the passage widened. Then, light. Not firelight, not reflection. Daylight. We stepped out from the far side of the caves and into open land. The world beyond Greth-An revealed itself at once. Gone was the marshland, left behind on the far side of the mountain. In its place stretched a wide expanse of soft, rolling hills, their slopes gentle and uninterrupted, covered in pale grasses that moved with the wind like the surface of a quiet sea. The air felt different here, cleaner, freer. I drew in a long breath without thinking. Behind us, the caves stood silent. Before us, the land carried onward for miles. The hills rose gradually toward the distant mountains that now stood fully revealed. Arathel. They were no longer shapes upon the horizon. They were vast, unmoving and silent beneath the open sky. Colcomvoc walked beside me without speaking, allowing the land to settle around us. At last I turned to him. "This is Arathel?" He nodded slightly. "The beginning of it." His gaze remained fixed ahead. In the tongue of Kimdroith, Arath means light, El means God. I looked again toward the mountains. "The God of light," I said quietly. Colcomvoc gave a small nod. "But the light is not here," he said. "Not yet." I frowned slightly, glancing again at the mountains. From this distance they appeared like any other, vast, yes, but cold and natural, their stone untouched by anything unusual. "The light is within," he continued, "not upon the surface." We walked on, the ground rising gently beneath our feet. "The man from the caves," I said after a while, "the one who did not fall." Colcomvoc's expression did not change. "If he lives," he said, "then he is there." He gestured toward the mountains ahead. There is nowhere else beyond Greth-An but Arathel. The journey across the hills took time, though it did not weigh upon me as the caves had. The land was open, the sky wide, and the silence carried no hidden threat. By the time we reached the foothills, the ground beneath us had turned to stone. The air grew sharper, clearer still, yet the mountain remained unchanged in appearance. No glow, no sign of what Colcomvoc had spoken of, only stone. We came at last to what appeared to be a sheer face of unbroken rock. No path revealed itself, no opening, no shadow that might suggest a way through. I slowed. "There is nothing here," I said. Colcomvoc stepped forward, but did not touch the stone. Instead, he looked at me. "It is not hidden from the eye," he said quietly. "It is hidden from the heart." The wind seemed to fall away around us. "Speak," he said. I hesitated for only a moment before reaching for the book at my side, but as my fingers touched it, I realized I did not need to open it. The words were already within me, and so I spoke. Light before stone, breath before word, we stand not as masters, but as those who have heard. Arathel, awaken not to the voice, but the flame, for the truth that is carried gives life to the name. Let shadow be scattered, let falsehood be gone, for we walk in the echo of the first holy song. If we are unworthy, let stone remain still, but if truth walks within us, then open by will. At first, nothing happened. The mountain remained as it was, silent, unmoving, unchanged. Then slowly, something shifted. The surface of the stone wavered, faintly at first, like heat rising from the earth. Light bent across it in a way that felt wrong to the eye, as though the mountain itself had become uncertain. I felt something stir within me, not around me, within me. The final words left me not as something spoken, but as something released. Then opened by will, the illusion gave way, not shattered, not broken, lifted, like a veil drawn aside. Where there had been only stone, there was now an opening, vast and ancient, carved not by hand but by time itself. It had always been there, hidden, waiting. The air that flowed from within carried a warmth unlike anything I had felt before. Colcomvoc opened his eyes and looked at me. There was no surprise in his expression, only certainty. "You see," he said quietly. I nodded. We stepped inside. The change was immediate. The darkness did not close around us as it had in the caves behind us. Instead, a soft golden light filled the passage, radiating from the stone itself. I stopped without meaning to. The walls glowed faintly, as though something deep within them had been stirred to life. It was not fire, not reflection. It was something else entirely. "Trendelin," Colcomvoc said, "Harp Rock." I placed my hand against the wall. It was warm, as though it carried breath within it. Then I heard it. At first it was distant, a faint layering of sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Then it grew clearer. Voices, many voices, rising and falling together in perfect harmony. And beneath them, something deeper, resonant tones that hummed through the stone like the strings of an unseen harp. The mountain was answering them. "The Trendeloni," Colcomvoc said quietly. "They have lived within Arathel for centuries." We moved deeper, and the passage opened into vast carved chambers. The mountain had been shaped from within, stone cut into halls, pathways, and great open spaces of gathering. Some resembled dwellings, others something far more sacred. Chapels of stone, carved with purpose and care. The people moved within them in quiet devotion. Some stood in stillness, eyes closed, singing softly. Others walked slowly, their voices joining the harmony without ever breaking it. The light around us responded. It deepened as the voices rose. It softened as they fell. "They do not stop," Colcomb-Voc said, "day or night." "Why?" I asked quietly. He looked toward the singers. "Because the darkness does not stop either." The meaning settled heavily within me. "They worship the Creator," he continued, "not this mountain, but the one who made it." I looked around again, taking in the carved halls, the glowing stone, the unbroken sound. "The whispers cannot reach here," he said. "The mountain rejects them. And the hymns—" I felt his gaze turn toward me. "Protect the mind." My hand moved instinctively to the satchel at my side, where the book of hymns rested. The same words, the same protection. I looked deeper into the mountain, toward whatever lay beyond the visible halls. "If the man from the caves lives," Colcomb-Voc spoke before I finished, "then we will find him here." And as the light of Arathel surrounded us, I understood something clearly. The mountain did not create the light. The people did, and through them it endured. Chapter 13. The Heart of Arathel. The deeper halls of Arathel did not feel carved in the way one might expect of stone. There were no harsh lines, no marks of tools or effort. Instead, the passageways seemed formed, shaped slowly and with purpose, as though the mountain itself had yielded to something patient and enduring. The light did not diminish as we walked further within. If anything, it became fuller. Not brighter in the way of fire or day, but deeper, as though it carried substance rather than mere illumination. The voices of the Tren Deloni surrounded us. Some were near, soft and clear, while others echoed faintly from chambers far beyond sight. Yet none conflicted, none rose above the rest. They moved together, as though guided by something unseen, forming a single living harmony that seemed to breathe through the stone itself. We were led into a wider chamber where the sound gathered with greater clarity. It was not louder, but more complete. Here, the mountain answered more readily, its faint golden glow shifting gently with the movement of the hymn. It was there that we first saw her. Kyth-Aran stood among the others, not elevated, not set apart, and yet unmistakable. There was nothing in her stance that demanded attention, and yet it was given all the same. She was tall, steady, and carried a quiet certainty that did not need to be spoken. Her gaze met ours as we approached, and for a moment she said nothing, as though observing something beyond what was visible. "You have come through Greth-An," she said at last. Her voice was calm, but it carried weight. Colcomb-Voc inclined his head slightly. "We have." She studied him briefly, then turned her attention to me. "And you have spoken the entrance?" It was not a question. I nodded. For a moment, the three of us stood in silence while the hymn continued around us, unbroken and undisturbed. Then she turned and began to walk, and we followed without being asked. "The mountain answers what is given to it," she said as we moved through the chamber. "Not words alone, but truth." As she passed her hand lightly along the stone wall, it seemed to respond, the faint glow deepening beneath her touch. "The hymns are not power," she continued. "They are alignment." Colcomb-Voc glanced toward the gathered voices. "And when they are sung together?" She looked ahead, toward where the sound was strongest. "They become one voice." We entered another hall where many stood in stillness, their voices joined in perfect unity. No one led and no one followed, yet nothing was out of place. The sound did not feel produced. It felt sustained, as though it had always been there, and they had simply joined it. "The mountain does not create this," Kyth-Aran said. "It receives it." Her gaze moved slowly across those gathered, and what is received is returned. I placed my hand against the stone beside me. It was warm, not with heat, but with something that felt almost like breath, steady and alive beneath the surface. The whispers cannot reach here, I said quietly. They cannot remain where truth is not broken, she replied. Colcomb-Voc stepped forward slightly. There was a man, he said, from Greth-An. He did not fall. Kyth-Aran was silent for a moment, not hesitating, but remembering. There was one, she said at last. Wynnen. The name lingered in the air. He came as you have come, she continued, burdened but not lost. He remained here only a short while. I frowned. He left? He did. The hymn did not falter. The voices carried on as they had before, unchanged. Why would he leave? I asked. Her eyes met mine again. Because Arathel is not the end. The words settled heavily, though they were spoken without force. He went east, she continued, beyond the outer ridges, to the falls of Raznim. At the mention of the name, Colcomb-Voc's expression shifted slightly, recognition, though he said nothing. They are not as they appear, Kyth-Aran said. The waters conceal what lies behind them, hollows within the cliff, places untouched by light, and yet not without it. I looked back toward the deeper chambers, toward the light and the voices that filled the mountain with quiet certainty. You did not stop him? I asked. We do not hold those who are called onward, she replied. The mountain shelters, she said, her voice steady, but it does not keep. I let the words settle. Will we find him there? I asked. Kyth-Aran did not answer immediately. Her gaze moved past us, as though seeing beyond the mountain itself. If he still walks in truth, she said quietly, then your paths will meet. The hymn continued, rising and falling in perfect harmony, and as I stood within the light of Arathel, listening to the voices that did not cease, I understood something I had not before. This was not where the journey ended, it was where it was strengthened. Chapter 14. The Whispers of Tannath-Kook. We did not leave Arathel in haste. There was no urgency within the mountain, no sense that we were being driven onward. The voices of the Trendeloni continued as they always had, steady, unbroken, as though time itself held no command there. Even as Colcomb-Voc and I made our way toward the outer passages, the harmony remained behind us, unchanged. Kyth-Aran walked with us for a time before she spoke. The path ahead is not as this place. Her hand brushed lightly against the stone as we passed, and for a brief moment the golden glow beneath her fingers deepened, as though the mountain itself acknowledged her touch. The whispers of Tannath-Kook do not remain in one place, she continued. They move as they will, passing through the land without pattern or warning. Colcomb-Voc inclined his head slightly. Then we may not meet them. You may not, Kyth-Aran said. But if you do, you must not remain in the open. Her gaze settled on me, steady and certain. They do not come as creatures of flesh, she said. They come as pressure, as voice, as thought that is not your own. They will press against the mind and seek to divide it, to turn it from truth. I felt a stillness come over me as she spoke. If they reach you unguarded, she continued, they will not strike the body first. They will take what is within. Colcomb-Voc's expression did not change. And how are they resisted? The stones, she said. Go to them without delay. Place your hand upon them and speak the hymn you carry. Do not break it. Do not answer what you hear. The whispers will seek to draw you away from the words. You must remain. Her voice did not rise, but it carried weight. If the hymn holds, they will pass. The light of Arathel remained with us until the very threshold. Then, without fading or dimming, it simply ceased. The sky beyond was grey, heavy though no storm moved within it. The air felt sharper, thinner somehow, and the warmth that had lived within the mountain was gone as though it had never been. Before us stretched a woodland, but it was no true forest. The trees rose tall, yet none were living. Their trunks twisted upward in unnatural spirals, as though their growth had been turned against itself. Branches curled inward, blackened and brittle, stripped bare of leaf and life. The ground was pale and fractured, roots forcing through the earth only to wither where they lay. Among them stood the monoliths, hundreds of them, great standing stones, rising from the ground at uneven intervals, weathered by age yet unmoved by it. Each bore faint markings across its surface, worn but not lost. "This is the path," Kitharin said. Her gaze moved across the woodland, steady and knowing. "If the whispers come, do not remain in the open." She turned to me. "You carry the hymns." I nodded. "Then remember them. Go to the stones, place your hand upon them, speak, and do not break the hymn." Colcumvoc studied the woodland ahead. "And the whispers?" "They will press," she said. "They will seek to divide what must remain whole. You must not answer them." For a moment, none of us spoke. Then she stepped back. "Walk in truth." We descended into the woodland alone. The silence that met us was not like that of Arathel. There the quiet had been filled with presence. Here it felt hollow, empty, as though something had been taken and not returned. Our footsteps sounded louder than they should have. The monoliths stood scattered around us, some close enough to reach quickly, others further away, half hidden among the twisted trees. I found my gaze drawn to them as we walked. There was something familiar in their presence, not the same as Arathel, but not wholly separate from it either. We had been walking for some time when I first heard it. At first, I thought it was nothing more than a shift in the air, a faint movement between the trees. But there was no wind. Colcumvoc slowed beside me. "You hear it?" I nodded. The sound deepened, not louder, but nearer. The air itself seemed to tighten, a subtle pressure gathering around us as though something unseen had begun to take form. Then I saw it, not clearly, not as a shape, but as a distortion, like dark mist folding into itself in the distance. "The stones," Colcumvoc said. We moved at once. The nearest of the standing stones rose slightly ahead, rooted deep within the pale earth. We reached it quickly, pressing close against its surface. I placed my hand upon the stone. It was cold, but not empty. The whisper came. At first it was not sound but pressure, a quiet intrusion, subtle and searching, as though something probed at the edges of my thoughts. Then came fragments of voice. Not words, not yet, but something straining toward them. I closed my eyes. I did not reach for the book. I did not need to. The hymn was already within me. I began to speak. At first, my voice felt small against the weight that gathered around us. The whisper thickened, pressing inward, seeking to fracture the rhythm of the words, to break the line before it could be completed. For a moment, my breath faltered. Then Colcumvoc's hand struck the stone beside mine, not in force, but in presence. "Continue." I did. The words steadied. One followed another without break, each line holding firm against the pressure that surrounded us. The stone beneath my hand seemed to change, not in light, but in strength, as though something within it answered the hymn. The whisper pressed harder. It rose like a storm without wind, circling, tightening, seeking to unravel what I held together. The fragments of sound twisted closer to meaning, pressing at the edges of my thoughts, trying to pull them apart. But I did not stop. Time seemed to fall away. There was only the hymn, the steady presence of the stones, and the pressure pressing against me. Then, slowly, it began to weaken. Not broken, not driven back, but thinning. The pressure eased. The sound faded, and at last It passed. I opened my eyes. The twisted trees stood as they had before, unmoving, silent. The air returned to its hollow stillness. Colcom Voc lowered his hand. "It works," he said. I nodded, though the weight of it still lingered within me. We did not remain. We moved on. The path did not change, but our pace did. There was no need to speak it. We both felt it. This was not a place to linger. The monoliths passed more quickly now as we moved between them, each one a silent witness to something older than the corruption that surrounded it. After a time, I heard something new. At first, it was faint, then clearer. Water. The ground began to slope downward, the twisted trees thinning as stone replaced earth beneath our feet. The sound grew stronger, filling the silence that had followed us through the woodland. "A waterfall," I said. Colcom Voc did not answer, but he moved faster. The roar grew until it filled everything. The woodland gave way at last to open stone, and there before us stood a vast wall of falling water, pouring from the heights above, its force unbroken, its sound immense. Mist rose from its base, filling the air with movement and life that had been absent from the forest behind us. We did not slow. The whisper returned. This time, it did not gather. It surged, fast. I felt it before I saw it. A sudden, overwhelming pressure driving forward without hesitation. Colcom Voc turned sharply. "Move!" We ran. The ground was slick beneath our feet as we neared the falls, the roar of the water drowning all else. But the presence behind us did not need sound. It closed the distance with unnatural speed. "Through!" Colcom Voc shouted. There was no hesitation. We leapt. The water struck like a wall, cold and unyielding, forcing breath from my lungs as we passed through its unbroken fall. For a moment there was nothing but its force, sound and motion without form. Then, stone. We stumbled forward into the hollow behind the falls. The roar remained, but distant now, contained by the curtain of water behind us. I turned. The whisper struck the falling water and stopped. It pressed against the surface, folding inward, recoiling as though the water itself rejected it. For a moment it lingered, straining without passage. Then it withdrew. The chamber behind the falls was dim, but not dark. Thin streams of water traced the stone walls, gathering in shallow channels along the ground. The air was cool and steady, filled with the constant echo of the falls beyond. Colcom Voc stood still for a moment, catching his breath. "We are through," he said. I nodded, though my gaze remained on the veil of water behind us. For the first time since leaving Arathel, the pressure was gone. But the journey had not ended. It had only led us somewhere deeper. Chapter 15. The Finding of Wynnen. The sound of the waterfall did not follow us far. Once we had passed through its veil and into the hollow beyond, the roar softened into a distant, steady murmur, as though the water no longer fell, but simply existed somewhere behind the stone. The air within was cool and damp, and the faint light that entered from the opening behind us stretched only a short distance before giving way to shadow. For a time, Colcom Voc and I stood without speaking. There was no immediate sign of life, no movement, no voice, nothing to suggest that anyone had passed this way for years. Only the quiet tracing of water along the rock disturbed the stillness, and even that seemed subdued, as though the cave itself absorbed sound. We began to walk. The passage did not narrow as I had expected, but instead stretched on, widening in places and bending gently into deeper darkness. There were no clear signs that it had been carved, yet something about it felt shaped, not by tools, but by long presence, as though it had been lived in until it took on a form of its own. Our footsteps echoed softly as we moved, and I found myself listening for something beyond them, though I could not have said what. It was not long before something caught my eye. At first, I took it for nothing more than a natural imperfection in the stone, a line or mark worn unevenly over time. But there was a shape to it that held my attention, something too deliberate to be accidental. I slowed, then stopped, stepping closer to the wall. Carved into the rock was a rough formation of upright shapes arranged in a circle. I felt my breath catch before I understood why. "Stonehenge?" I said quietly, the word leaving me without thought. Colcomvock stopped beside me and looked at the carving with a measured expression. "What is it?" I hesitated, trying to find the right way to explain something that had always been ordinary to me, and yet now felt impossible in this place. "It's from where I came from Earth, a circle of standing stones. Very old, older than anything we fully understand." He studied the marking again, but I could see that it meant nothing to him beyond what I had said. To him, it was simply another carving among many. But to me, it felt like a fracture between two worlds, something that should not have existed here at all. We stood there for a moment longer before moving on, though I could not quite shake the feeling that the cave had shifted around us, as though it now held something it had not before. The passage continued deeper, revealing itself slowly to be far larger than it had first appeared. What had seemed a hollow behind the falls now stretched into a network of winding corridors, some narrow, others opening into wider spaces. Each one carried us further from the light we had left behind. The air remained steady, neither stifling nor cold, and there was a faint, ambient glow along the walls that allowed us to see without the need for flame. It was then that I noticed something else. On the ground, near the edge of the passage, lay a small piece of cloth. I knelt beside it and picked it up, turning it over in my hand. It was worn and faded, its edges frayed with time, yet the material was unmistakable. It was not like anything I had seen in Byth-Hammath. The weave was finer, the texture familiar in a way I could not ignore. "This," I said quietly, more to myself than to Colcomvock. He watched me closely. "It is not of this place." I shook my head. "No, it isn't." There was no doubt in my mind. "This is from Earth." For a moment we said nothing, and I became suddenly aware of how far we had come from the entrance, how the light behind us had all but vanished. I looked ahead into the dim passage, a quiet certainty forming in my thoughts. "If this is here," I said slowly, "then someone else has been here too." We continued on, but our pace had changed. There was a new awareness in every step, a sense that we were no longer moving through an empty place, but through something that had been inhabited, shaped by time and presence. The further we went, the clearer it became. The walls bore markings now, some faint, others cut more deeply into the stone. They were not patterns in the way the carvings in Arathel had been. These were different. Repeated lines, shapes drawn and redrawn, as though someone had tried again and again to hold on to something that would not remain. In places, the markings overlapped, older attempts carved over by newer ones, each layer slightly more uncertain than the last. In one section of the wall, I saw a name. It was not fully clear, not perfectly formed, but it had been carved more than once, the same letters repeated again and again, as though the act of writing them had been an effort to remember rather than to record. Beside it was a drawing, a face, simple but careful, deliberate. I stood there for a moment looking at it and felt something shift within me, not fear, but recognition of something deeply human. Whoever had been here had not merely passed through, they had stayed long enough to forget and to try not to. "Someone has lived here," I said quietly. Colcomvock did not respond, but I could feel his attention sharpen as he looked deeper into the passage ahead. We moved more slowly now. There were other signs, subtle but unmistakable. The ground had been worn smooth in certain places, as though someone had walked the same paths countless times. Small arrangements of stone lay near the walls, not placed with any visible purpose, but not random either. There was a sense of repetition in everything, of habit formed over time. We were no longer alone. I felt it before I saw him. It was not like the presence of the whispers. There was no pressure, no intrusion, only a quiet awareness, as though we were being observed from somewhere just beyond sight. Colcomvoc slowed, then stopped. "We have found him," he said softly. I did not answer. I was already looking ahead. At first there was nothing, only shadow and the faint suggestion of depth where the passage turned. Then something moved. A figure stepped forward into the dim light. He did not approach us. He simply stood there as though waiting, his gaze fixed on us with a quiet, measured caution. He was not what I had expected. He did not appear broken, nor wild, nor lost in the way I might have imagined. But he was changed. His clothing had been altered over time, no longer what it had once been, and his face carried something deeper than age, something shaped by long endurance. "You have come through the wood," he said. His voice was steady. Colcomvoc inclined his head. "We have." The man's gaze shifted to me, and in that moment something passed through his expression, not recognition, but something close to it. "You are not of this place," he said. "No," I replied quietly. "I'm not." There was a brief silence before he spoke again. "My name is Wynnen," he said. "That is the name I was given." He paused. "The Greth-Ani called me so, the people who lived within Greth-An before the fall." A faint tension crossed his face. "I was among them." "The whisper came," he said quietly, "as it did for the others." His gaze lowered. "I felt it, in the mind. It did not strike. It entered." His hand lifted faintly. It pressed, until thought itself began to change. "I held to the hymns," he said. "What I had learned, I did not let them go." His voice steadied. "So I did not fall." He did not finish the thought of the others. He did not need to. "There is something else," he said quietly. "There is a carving," I replied, "a circle of stones." He stilled. "Stonehenge." "I have heard that word," he said slowly. "It's a place," I said, "on earth, in England." "England," he repeated, then slowly. "A room, walls not of stone, voices." I was speaking. He frowned, standing before them, explaining something. His breathing shifted. "Stones, in a field, under an open sky. There was a woman." He stopped. "I cannot see her clearly." "I tried to remember," he said quietly. "I carved it before it faded." I looked at the walls again. "You've been here a long time," I said. He did not answer. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me about it." So I did. I spoke of earth, of places and names that had once been ordinary. And as I spoke, I saw it happening within him. Not all at once, but piece by piece. "I remember," he said softly. "I remember something. I remember that I was someone." But the name did not come, and as I stood there looking at him, I understood something with a clarity that unsettled me. The whispers did not only seek to destroy, they sought to take, and what they took did not always return. Chapter 16. A Mission to Remember. The stillness behind the falls did not feel like silence. It was something else entirely, not the absence of sound, but a quieter presence that endured beneath it. The water continued beyond the veil in a steady descent, its voice softened by the stone until it became a distant, constant murmur. The air remained cool and faintly damp, carrying a balance that had not been present since we had left Arathel. Wynnen stood near the entrance, his attention fixed upon the falling water, though it seemed he was looking through it rather than at it. There was no restlessness in him, no outward sign of strain, yet something in the way he stood suggested that his thoughts were not at ease. I watched him for a time before speaking. "You remember more now," I said. He turned slowly, as though the movement required care. "More than before," he answered, "but not enough." His voice held steady, though it carried a quiet tension. "Things come," he said. "Fragments. They appear, then fade. I cannot keep them." His gaze lowered briefly. "I know I was not always here," he went on. "That much remains. But what I was—" His words faltered. "It stays just beyond me." Colcum Voc remained nearby, his awareness stretched between us and the cave beyond. He did not interrupt, though it was clear he followed every word. I stepped closer. "When the fragments come," I said, "what do they show you?" Wynnen drew in a slow breath. "A place," he replied, "not of stone, ordered, shaped in another way." He paused, searching. "Walls that do not carry weight as these do, surfaces without roughness." His eyes drifted, unfocused. "Voices," he continued, "many, not raised in fear, listening." He swallowed. "I stand before them." The words came with more certainty than before. "I speak," he said. "I explain something I understand." A quiet space settled between us, filled with something not yet fully formed. "Do you see yourself?" I asked. The question seemed to reach deeper than the others. "Myself?" he said. "Yes," I replied. "Your own face." He remained still, the thought taking hold slowly. "I do not," he said at last. The answer came without resistance. "I have not seen it for longer than I can remember." I turned toward the falls. The water moved in constant motion, its surface broken and shifting without rest. Light touched it only to scatter, offering no image in return. "It cannot be seen there," I said. He followed my gaze. "The water?" he asked. "It does not hold," I answered. "It will not remain still." For a time, I watched the current as it struck the stone and broke apart, refusing any form that might be preserved. "The only place I have seen water lie still enough for such a thing," I said, "was in Pen-Mec-Foon." Colcum Voc stepped forward then, his presence steady. "There are other ways," he said. Wynnen turned toward him. "As there are always other ways," Colcum Voc continued. "Water is not the only surface that reflects." I looked to him. "What do you mean?" "There is a stone," he said, "in the marshlands of Doth-Mor." The memory of that place returned faintly, the slow ground, the heavy air. "It appears as any other," he went on, "until it is opened." "Opened?" I asked. He inclined his head. "Within, the surface is smooth. It reflects as still water does." Wynnen's focus sharpened. "A mirror," he said. "If that is the word you would use," Colcum Voc replied. Silence followed. "And this stone," Wynnen said, "it lies in Doth-Mor?" "Yes." The simplicity of the answer did not lessen its weight. I looked between them, the path already forming. "To reach it," I said, "we must leave this place." Colcum Voc gave no objection. "We would pass again through the woodland," I continued, "the stones, and whatever moves among them." "They may still be there," Wynnen said. "They may," I answered. "And Arathel?" I asked. "It only opens from the entrance at the south side," Colcum Voc said. "We must go around it." The journey settled into certainty. Beyond Arathel lay the marshland, Doth-Mor, and within it the stone. If it will show me, Wynnen said quietly, then I would see. There was no urgency in his voice, only resolve. I nodded. Then we will go. For a time none of us moved. The sound of the falls continued unchanged, yet something had shifted, not in the cave nor in the water, but within us. At last, Colcomvock turned toward the passage leading outward. Wynnen followed. I remained a moment longer, watching the water fall, unceasing, unbroken, never holding what passed across it. Then I turned, and together we made ready to leave the falls of Raznim behind. Chapter 17. Back through the whispers. We left the falls of Raznim without speaking, though there was no need for silence between us. The sound of the water lingered behind, softened by distance with each step we took through the narrowing passage, until at last it faded into something that could no longer be heard, only remembered. The air shifted as we emerged, losing the calm balance of the cavern and taking on the weight of the world beyond it. By the time we reached the outer edge, the light had dimmed in a way that could not be traced to cloud or sky, but to the land itself. The woodland lay before us once again. It appeared unchanged. The same twisted forms of the trees, bent and contorted as though shaped by something that had long since passed, stood in their silent disorder. Between them, the monoliths rose as they had before, vast, uneven, and scattered across the ground without pattern. Nothing moved among them. No sound carried across the space. Yet the memory of what had taken place here remained as clearly as the land itself. Colcomvock stepped forward without hesitation, and we followed. There was no pause, no exchange of words, only a shared understanding of what lay ahead. Our pace was steady from the beginning, not hurried, not cautious in the way of fear, but deliberate, as though each step had already been considered before it was taken. The monoliths marked the land not as obstacles, but as points toward which we moved, each one a place of certainty within the stillness. For a time, nothing changed. The silence did not press against us as it had before. It remained present, but it no longer felt watchful. It was simply there, as much a part of the woodland as the trees or the stone. We moved from one point to the next, the ground passing beneath us without resistance, the space between the monoliths widening and narrowing in ways that no longer unsettled the mind. Wynnen walked with us, his attention not fixed upon any one thing, but held across the space itself. There was a steadiness in him that had not been there when we first met. It was not certainty, nor was it ease, but something that held against what might come, rather than yielding to it. We had crossed nearly half the woodland before the change began. It came without sound. At first it was no more than a shift in the air, a subtle drawing inward, as though the space between the trees had tightened by some unseen measure. The stillness altered, not broken, but bent into a form that no longer felt entirely at rest. It was enough. Wynnen slowed, though he did not stop. "It is near," he said. There was no urgency in his voice, only recognition. Colcomvock's path did not change. "Then we continue," he said. I felt it then, though not as I had before. It did not descend upon us or press suddenly against the mind. It approached, gradual and distant, as though it had yet to decide its course. Among the trees, the faintest distortion began to gather, barely visible at first, like heat rising from stone, yet darker, less defined. It moved without sound, drawing itself together as it passed between the trunks. "There," Wynnen said quietly. We saw it now, not fully formed, but present enough to be known. It did not rush toward us. It advanced with a kind of patience, its movement measured, as though testing the space it entered rather than claiming it. Colcomvock turned toward the nearest monolith, his direction certain. We followed without hesitation, our steps quickening but never breaking into disorder. The stone rose before us, vast and irregular, its surface worn by time, yet unchanged in its presence. I placed my hand against it. The cold of it was immediate. Wynnen stood beside me, and without pause, his voice began to carry the hymns. I joined him, the words coming without effort, forming as though they had never been absent. There was no struggle to recall them, no searching for what had once been uncertain. They were simply there, held in the mind and given voice. Colcom Voc remained close, his stance firm, his attention fixed outward. The whisper drew nearer, its presence gathered at the edge of our awareness, not entering, but pressing against it, as though seeking some place within it that might give way. The air around it shifted, bending in a manner that did not belong to the natural order of the land. It lingered there, not striking as before, but testing what stood before it. We did not yield. The hymns did not rise in force, nor did they seek to drive the whisper back. They remained steady, unbroken, filling the space around us with something that did not move, did not change. The stone beneath my hand held its place without question. In that stillness, something else took form, not resistance as I had known it before, but a grounding that could not be undone. The pressure remained, but it did not take hold. Wynnen's voice did not falter. There was strain within it, but it did not overcome him. The whisper shifted, moving along the edge of the space we held, circling without entering, searching without finding. Time passed in a way that could not be measured. Then, as it had formed, it began to lessen. The distortion unraveled, the movement of the mist settling back into stillness, as though nothing had disturbed it. The pressure withdrew, not in retreat, but in absence, until it was no longer there at all. The woodland returned to what it had been, unchanged. Our voices fell silent. For a moment none of us moved, though there was no need to remain. "It passes," Colcom Voc said. Wynnen inclined his head slightly. "It does." I looked toward the place where it had been, though there was nothing now to mark it. We stepped away from the stone and continued. The path ahead held no further change. The monoliths remained, scattered as they had been, marking the land without guiding it. Yet something within the crossing had altered, not in the woodland itself, but in how it was passed. What had once required urgency no longer did. What had once unsettled no longer reached as deeply. By the time we reached the far edge, the trees had begun to thin, their twisted forms giving way to open space. The ground beneath us softened, the first signs of the marshland returning as the air grew heavier once more. Doth-Mor lay ahead. Behind us, the woodland remained in its silence, unchanged by our passing. We did not turn to look at it, and together we went on. Chapter 18. The Mirror Stone of Doth-Mor. We did not turn back toward Arathel, but followed the mountain along its outer edge, keeping to the ground that curved steadily around it. Its height remained behind us, vast and unmoving, though the light that marked its entrance no longer reached where we walked. The land felt quieter here, though not in the way of peace, only in the absence of what had come before. I found myself watching the air without meaning to, as though expecting some change within it, but nothing came. There were no whispers. Colcom Voc did not slow, nor did he look back. I followed as I had since leaving Arathel, and Wynnen walked with us, quieter than before. Something in him had shifted, though I could not have said exactly what. He no longer seemed lost, yet neither was he fully returned, as though something within him had begun to take form without settling into place. We spoke little, and in time the caves of Greth-An rose ahead of us once more, their vast openings cut into the stone as though forced rather than shaped. I remembered the weight of that place before we had entered it, the presence that had filled the darkness above, but as we drew nearer, that memory no longer matched what lay before us. The stillness was complete. Colcom Voc slowed at the entrance and looked upward, I followed his gaze. There was nothing there. The ceiling lay bare, empty of the forms that had once clung to it. No movement, no sound, nothing to suggest that anything remained. "They are gone," Colcomvock said. "The Montori?" I asked. He gave a slight nod. Wynnen stepped a little further ahead, looking into the cavern, though there was nothing to see beyond the darkness that stretched inward. "Do they leave like this?" I asked. Colcomvock did not answer at once. His attention shifted, not into the cave, but beyond it, as though measuring something at a distance. "They move when they must," he said. It was not an answer that settled anything, but he did not offer more, and after a moment he stepped inside. We followed. The cave felt larger now, though I knew it had not changed. Our footsteps echoed more clearly, no longer softened by the presence that had once filled the space above. The air remained cool, the stone unchanged, yet something essential was missing. We walked through without slowing. What had once required care now required nothing at all. When we emerged on the far side, the land opened and the air thickened at once, heavy with the scent of water and earth. Doth-Mor stretched ahead, its ground uneven and dark, broken by shallow pools and soft patches that shifted underfoot. The horizon seemed lower here, pressed down by the weight of the marsh. Colcomvock stepped onto it without hesitation. I followed more carefully, testing each step before placing my weight, feeling the ground give slightly before holding. Wynnen came after us, his movements steady, though his attention seemed elsewhere, not on the ground, but on something within himself. There was no path. Yet Colcomvock did not search for one. He moved as though he already knew where to go, and we followed him across the uneven ground until the water gathered more thickly around us, and the earth beneath grew darker and less certain. Then he stopped. "There," he said. At first, I saw nothing that stood apart from the rest, only another stone set into the marsh. But as I looked more closely, I saw that it lay deeper than the others, as though it had not fallen there, but settled into place long ago. Colcomvock stepped toward it and tested the ground beside it with the base of his spear. Then he raised the weapon and brought it down in a single controlled strike. The stone split. It opened cleanly, revealing a surface within that bore no likeness to the rough exterior. It was smooth, unbroken, untouched by the marsh that surrounded it, and it held its stillness in a way the water could not. Wynnen did not move at first. Then slowly he stepped forward. He looked down into the open stone. For a moment there was no change. Then something shifted, not suddenly, but in a way that moved through him gradually, as though something long distant had begun to return. "I," he said quietly. The word lingered, unfinished. He did not look away. "I know this," he said. His reflection held steady beneath him. "I have seen this face." His voice had changed, though only slightly, as though it now carried something that had not been there before. "A name," he said. He frowned faintly, as though reaching for it. The word came slowly. "Richard." He paused, and the name seemed to settle, not yet complete. He remained there, looking into the stone, waiting, not searching with force, but holding to what had come. "I was," he began, though the thought did not follow. Time passed. No one spoke. Then something in his expression tightened, not with confusion, but with effort. "Drink," he said. The word faltered. He closed his eyes briefly, as though listening inward rather than thinking. When he spoke again, it came more clearly. "Drink water." He opened his eyes. "Richard, drink water." This time the name remained, not uncertain, not slipping, held. He stayed there for a moment longer, then lowered himself and carefully worked a smaller piece from the inner face of the stone, a thin slate that broke away cleanly. He lifted it and looked into it once more before standing, keeping it with him. Colcomvock had already stepped back. "We do not remain here," he said. I looked to him, waiting. "The Montori have left Greth-An," he said. "They have gone somewhere." He paused, then added, "I believe they may have gone south." "South?" I asked. "Toward Pen-Mec-Foon." There was no certainty in the words, only judgment. "If they have gone there," he said, "the Mârcogi Bârchi may be in danger." I said nothing. I only listened. Colcomvock turned slightly, looking back toward the direction of the caves. "You will return to Greth-An," he said. "The caves stand empty. There you will find shelter." "And you?" I asked. "I will go south," he said. "I will see what has come of it." He looked at me then, briefly. "Wait for my return." I nodded. Wynnen remained silent, though the name he had spoken seemed to rest with him still. Colcomvock turned and began to cross the marsh, his steps steady despite the shifting ground. We watched him as he moved further away, until the land itself seemed to take him, and he was no longer there. The marsh grew quiet again. I glanced once more at the open stone, then turned toward Greth-An. "We go back," I said. Wynnen inclined his head, and together we made our way toward the caves. Chapter 19. The Fall of the Greth-Ani. The caves of Greth-An did not feel the same when we returned. The entrance stood open as it had before, yet without the presence that had once filled it. The darkness within no longer felt alive, only empty. That absence should have brought relief, yet it did not. Something in the stillness remained unsettled, as though the stone itself had not forgotten what it had once held. We entered without speaking. Our footsteps echoed more clearly than before, carrying further into the cavern and returning to us unchanged. I found myself looking upward more than once, though I knew there was nothing there. The ceiling stretched bare above us, the places where the Montori had once hung now silent and undisturbed. We moved deeper until the outer world no longer seemed to reach us, until even the memory of it felt distant. Only then did we stop. The chamber we chose was not the same as before, though it resembled it closely enough, enclosed, sheltered, with space enough to keep a small fire without letting its light travel too far. Wynnen settled without hesitation, though there was no rest in him. He held the slate of stone in his hand, turning it slightly so that it caught what little light there was, and for a time he looked into it without speaking. When he finally did, his voice carried neither distance nor uncertainty, only the weight of something remembered. He told me that the Greth-Ani had lived there, in those caves, and that they had not lived as others did. What they had, they shared, not as a rule to be followed, but as something understood without question. Food, space, warmth. None of it was kept back, because none of it needed to be. It had not changed at once. He said it had begun with something small, something that should not have mattered, and as he spoke, I could see it as though it had happened before me. Two men standing apart from the others, their voices raised not in anger at first, but in disagreement that did not yield. The matter itself was simple, food that had always been divided evenly, but something in the way they spoke had shifted. Each believed the other had taken more than was theirs. That alone should have ended, but it did not. Others came, not to settle it, but to stand with one or the other. The argument did not remain between the two men. It spread, taking hold in others, turning what had once been shared into something divided. Words gave way to doubt, doubt to certainty, and certainty to refusal. Wynnen's voice did not rise as he spoke of it, yet the weight of what he described settled heavily in the space between us. They had not seen it then, he said. They believed their thoughts were their own, that what they felt was justified, that what they saw was true. But it had not come from them. It had entered. The whisper. He did not need to name it again for me to understand. though I found myself speaking it quietly, as though testing the word itself. He gave a small, confirming nod, and after a moment I asked about the name that had remained with me since I had first heard it spoken in this place. Tannath-Kook. Wynnen did not answer immediately. When he did, it was not with certainty, but with the tone of something long told and only partly understood. He had heard the name, he said, in stories spoken around the fire before the fall of the Greth-Ani, stories passed on rather than proven. They spoke of a time before the land had changed, when all of Byth-Hammath had existed without division, when nothing had yet come to disturb what was already in place. It was then, he said, that the creature had come, a small snake, no different from any other in form, its body silver, its head marked with a deep red. It had not been feared, nor had it been known for anything beyond what it was, until it entered the lake of Raznim. That place had never been forbidden by command, he said, but by understanding. It was known that nothing should enter it, though not all knew why. The snake had not known, or had not cared, and when it passed into the water, it did not remain as it had been. What entered that lake did not stay the same. It multiplied, not only in size, but in what it carried. The poison within the snake did not remain contained. It grew, spreading beyond what had once been small and contained until it became something greater than the creature itself. The snake changed with it, no longer what it had been, no longer something that could be measured in the same way. Yet it could not leave. If it left the water, he said, it would return to what it had once been. Whatever it had become could not exist beyond the lake in its full form. So it did not leave. Instead, it sent out what it had become in another way, through thought, through influence, through something that could reach beyond the place it was bound to. The whispers and the Montori, he said, were drawn into it, though whether they served it or simply followed what it brought, he did not know. When he fell silent, the cave seemed to deepen around us. The fire burned low, its light steady but faint, holding only the space nearest to us, while the darkness beyond remained untouched. Wynnen looked again into the slate he carried, not searching now, but holding what he had found, as though the act of looking was no longer about discovery, but about keeping what might otherwise slip away. I did not ask more. Chapter 20. The Dream of Mythstad. The fire had long since burned low. What little light remained in the chamber rested close to the ground, its glow faint against the stone, offering warmth more than sight. The cave held its silence without effort, undisturbed by movement or sound, and in that stillness, sleep came without resistance. I lay with the book beneath my head, the worn edges pressing faintly against the rock below. Wynnen rested not far from me, his coat folded beneath him. The slate he carried kept close even in sleep. The quiet did not press against us. It simply remained. And then, without knowing when it had begun, I was no longer there. The air was different. It carried warmth that did not come from fire, and the ground beneath my feet was soft and living. When I lifted my eyes, I knew the place at once, the garden. It had not changed. Nothing had faded or shifted. The same stillness remained, though it was not empty. It held something that did not move and did not leave. The sense of it settled through me as it had before, not as comfort alone, but as something deeper, something that could not be broken. Elian walked beside me. I did not see him arrive. He was simply there, as though he had never been absent. His presence held the same quiet certainty as the garden itself, and as we moved together, I felt again what I had felt before, something steady, something whole. We walked without direction. For a time, nothing was said. Then his voice came, not loud, not distant, but clear in a way that did not need to be heard. Mythstad, remember the stone. It carries a power yet to be understood. The words did not linger as sound, but as something that settled within me. Before I could speak, the garden was no longer there. I stood upon stone. It stretched outward in every direction, vast and unbroken, pale beneath a light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The surface beneath my feet was smooth, yet it felt as though it held something deeper within it, something that did not shift. Then I saw it. My name. It was not written as I had seen it before, but formed into the stone itself, vast in its shape, each letter stretching outward into the distance. I stood upon it without fully understanding how, only that I did. I was not alone. Across the stone, 4 gatherings stood apart from one another, each held within its own place, each unmoving. I did not know how I understood it, but I did. The tribes of Byth-Hammath, the Mârcogi Bârchi, stood as one, grounded, their presence steady and unbroken. The Greth-Ani stood as they had once been, not divided, not lost, but whole. The Trendaloni held their place in quiet stillness, as though listening to something beyond the space itself. And the 4th, I did not know them, yet I knew their name, the Yejulamti. Beneath each of them, the stone bore markings, not drawn, not carved in the way of tools, but set into it as though they had always been there. They did not shift, nor did they fade. They remained. I looked to the Mârcogi Bârchi. The words were there beneath them, of root and stone. They did not need to be read. They were known. My gaze moved. The Greth-Ani stood upon their place, and beneath them, of friendship and fire. The words held something that did not waver, though I could not have said why. Beyond them, the Trendaloni, of light and song. The sound of it did not reach my ears, yet it felt as though it was there. Then, the last, the Yejulamti. They stood further than the others, though not in distance, only in something I could not name. Beneath them, of test and time. The words did not settle as the others had. They remained, but they did not give themselves in the same way. I tried to hold them all at once, to understand how they stood together, how they were placed upon the same stone, yet remained apart. But the moment did not remain. The light shifted, or perhaps it was not light at all. The stone beneath my feet began to fade, not breaking, not vanishing, but passing from sight as though it had never needed to remain. And then I woke. The cave returned at once. The air was cold. The fire had nearly gone. For a moment I did not move, as though something of the dream still held me in place. Then it began to slip. The shapes, the words. I sat up quickly. Wynnen did not stir. I reached for a piece of stone near where I had lain, its surface rough beneath my fingers, and without waiting, I began to carve. The markings came first, then the words, not with thought, but with memory that had not yet faded, of root and stone, of friendship and fire, of light and song, of test and time. Each line pressed into the rock before it could be lost. Only when I had finished did I stop. The cave was silent once more. The fire had dimmed further, its light barely reaching the stone where I had carved. I looked at the words. I did not understand them, but I knew they mattered, and I would not forget them. Chapter 21. The Battle of Pen-Mec-Foon. We did not know what had taken place in Pen-Mec-Foon while we remained within the caves of Greth-An. The silence there held us apart from all else, and nothing of what had happened beyond it reached us in that time. It was only later, when it was told and understood, that the shape of those events became clear to me. It began with the sky. Those who were there said the light shifted before anything was heard, as though something had passed across it without form. Then movement followed, gathering above the forest, not scattered or wandering, but circling with purpose. The Montori. They came in number. They did not descend at once. They moved above the trees in widening arcs, their wings stretching across the sky until their presence could no longer be mistaken. The Mârcogi Bârchi were already prepared. They stood within the forest of Pen-Mec-Foon, not scattered, but placed with intent, each man holding his ground, each movement measured. The boars beneath them shifted with the same awareness, restless yet controlled, their strength held until needed. Colcomb-Voc stood among them. He did not call out. He did not need to. When the first of the Montori broke from the sky, it came with speed enough to shatter a lesser line. Others followed, no longer circling, but descending with clear intent. The first spear was thrown. It struck before the creature reached the ground, then another, and another. Those who saw it said the throws did not come in haste or fear, but with precision that did not fail. Each movement was measured. Each strike found its place. The Montori fell before reaching their mark, their bodies striking the earth without carrying further. But not all were stopped. Some broke through. They struck among the line with claw and teeth, their weight driving into the forest where the spears could not reach in time. The boars met them there, forcing them back with strength that did not falter. The ground held. The line did not break. Colcomb-Voc moved within it, not apart from the others, but among them, his spear finding its mark as surely as any. His voice came only when needed, steady and controlled, and they held. The Montori came again, fewer now, then fewer still, until the sky above the forest was clear once more. Those that remained fell before they could strike, and then it ended. The forest stood as it had before, though marked by what had passed. Dark forms lay where they had fallen, their wings broken, their movements stilled. No call marked the end. There was no need. But those who stood there did not take it as victory. The air had changed. It did not return to what it had been. The Mârcogi Bârchi remained where they stood, their attention held, as though what had come had not come alone. Only then did they move. The wounded were tended first. There were many. Claw and tooth had found their mark where the line had been reached. Blood marked the ground, though none of the men had fallen. The boars had borne much of the force. Some still stood. Some did not rise again. Before the battle had begun, Colcomb-Voc had already given his command. The women and children had been sent to the great hall of Arrodogos, where timber and stone held stronger than any place within the forest. They had gone without hesitation and remained there, beyond the reach of what had come. Even Arrodogos had not remained behind. He had left his hall. He had taken his place among them. When the last of the Montori had fallen, he stood not far from Colcomb-Voc, his presence steady, though marked by what had passed. "It is done," he said. Colcomb-Voc did not answer at once. Those near him said his gaze did not rest on the fallen or the wounded, but beyond the forest, as though he were listening for something not yet arrived. "They did not come without reason," he said. The words did not close the moment. They opened it. This is not the end of it. The air held still around him. This is how it begins. No one spoke. The meaning was clear. The Montori had come first. What followed would not come with wings. Colcomb-Voc turned, his voice carrying further now. "Mythstad is in Greth-An," he said, "and the whispers have touched that place before." The words moved through those who heard them. If this spreads, he will not stand against it alone. He did not raise his voice. "We go to him." There was no hesitation. The wounded were made ready to move. What could be carried was taken. What could not was left behind. Colcomb-Voc mounted. At his word, the Mârcogi Bârchi formed again, not as they had stood, but as they would move. They rode from Pen-Mec-Foon, not as men who had won, but as those who understood that what had come was only the beginning. They turned toward Doth-Mor. The forest gave way to marsh, the ground softening beneath them, water rising between each step. The boars carried them without faltering, their movement steady across the shifting land. Colcomvoc rode at their front. Behind him came the warriors of the Mârcogi Bârchi, near 100 in number, their spears ready, their formation unbroken. They did not slow, they did not speak. They rode toward Greth-An, and this time they rode before something else could reach us first.